People who escape death by complete luck. What happened? The light turned green at the intersection. I started to move forward, but the driver in the lane next to me honked and hit his brakes. I hit my brakes too and looked around. Just then, a car blew through the red light going 45 plus miles an hour. Had I continued through the intersection, my little hatchback might have been T-boned on the driver's side by a much larger vehicle. Thank goodness that other driver saw the car about to run through the red light and honked his horn, or I might have been flattened. Story 2. I was the third car waiting at a red light. People always wait a few seconds on green because this light gets ran all the time. First car in line is a little gray car. Light's been green several seconds, so they pull out. They get halfway through and a big dump truck full of gravel came flying through the intersection. Speed limit was only 25 and the guy had been doing dang near over 40. Took the whole front end off, narrowly missing the cab. If they'd been any further through, it would have smashed right through the cab. Car got spun out so hard they went off the road and almost hit a nearby church. The driver of the car was talking to people who ran over to check on them. I know they left in an ambulance. Story 3. I was in the passenger seat of my dad's small sports car, low to the ground, when a crowbar came off a work truck in front of us and flew into the windshield of our car. Somehow it stopped a few inches away from my face and I luckily happened to be looking down, which meant all the glass that would have ended up on my face was all in my hair instead. I always think about how lucky I was. I can't explain why that crowbar stopped half in, half out of the car. Crazy to think that if it didn't stop it, it would have hit me square in the forehead. Story 4. My only example. We went to a party at Paul Smith College. My friend's favorite cousin was a student there. Bonfire, booze, and someone had the bright idea to bring out a snowmobile. I was gonna ride on it, but had to go to the bathroom. I guess I took too long because he asked a different girl to ride with him. She did, and they were both killed like 2 minutes later. It was traumatizing. It blew my mind for a long time. Had I just held my pee in, I'm the one currently in a coffin instead of Christine. Story 5. Was driving home from a party with a friend in the car. Had a cop car on random patrol following me down to a main intersection. Avoiding any sort of risk of getting a ticket, I was being extra cautious when waiting for the light to change. My sight had only just changed to green, and since I was slower than normal moving off the line, it stopped me getting plowed by the semi that blew through the other part of the intersection on a red at full speed. I was just stunned, stopped there in silence. Even the cops took a minute or two to reflect on what had happened before they peeled off and lit that truck up. I ended up coming back along the road where the cops had finally managed to pull that driver over, 5 kilometers away from where the incident happened. Story 6. I was at a stop sign and this woman just plowed straight through the intersection without so much as a pause. And this was at a shopping avenue where there's frequent pedestrian traffic crossing the roads. I didn't even realize a cop was behind me at the intersection, but as she blew by, his lights kicked on. He roared past me after her, and as I'm continuing through on my turn, I see this woman, this 60-plus grandmotherly looking woman, trying to outrun this cop by blowing through a second intersection. He overtook her, cut her off in the middle of the intersection, and yells over his squad car's loudspeaker, "Get your butt back into the parking lot!" At this point, I'm laughing uproariously while as I sit at a red light, and as this old beast of a woman begrudgingly drives past me into the parking lot we came from, she flips me the bird. Like her decision to run a stop sign and a red light and try to evade a police officer is somehow my fault. So we're barely into these stories at all, and I think the key takeaway for all of this is look both ways, even on green. There's a lot of reckless driving out there. Story 7. I'll try to make a long story short. My ex-wife and her boyfriend she had behind my back tried to hire someone to kill me so that she could have my life insurance, and there wouldn't be a custody battle over our daughter, like there would be if she just left me. Luckily for me, the guy they hired to do the job was an undercover deputy, working a completely unrelated case against the drug-selling gang her boyfriend belonged to. Yeah, finding out about all this was a nice surprise. I had absolutely no clue. The boyfriend got 10 years because the gun he gave the deputy to kill me was stolen, and he had other stuff related to the gang on him. She got 5 years for conspiracy and was released after 3. Story 8. I was at an indoor shooting range testing a potato cannon. Don't ask. I was leaning against the stall wall with my hand behind my head while a buddy took a shot with it. Suddenly, I felt a pinch and burn sensation on my wrist. I take a look at my arm to see blood streaming from a half-inch deep hole on my wrist. The idiot in the stall next to me wasn't sure if his handgun was empty, so he did the most logical thing. He pointed it at the stall wall and pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed my wrist about 3 inches from my head. That's the only time I've ever seen an RSO tackle someone. There's a post on my profile with pictures. You'll have to sort by top to find it though. Story 9. It happened almost 20 years ago. It was a pretty stupid way to get injured. I went on a school beach trip at the beginning of the year, went into the ocean, which was very calm, and took that little jump to get over the cold and finally dive into it. We get a phenomenon called awahi, which means dead plankton turns the sea yellowish and keeps you from seeing what's below the surface. I was unlucky enough to hit a sandbank and immediately broke 2 vertebrae. The upper fracture would have been enough to kill me on the spot had the bone fragments gone into my spine, but it was a clear fracture. The lower one, though, did get into my spine. Then and there, I suddenly became nothing more than a head attached to a seemingly dead body and no way to turn around and ask for help. While holding my breath, I saw a hand next to my cheek and thought I was going to make it. It was horrifying to realize it was my own hand. And then, the duo ex machina. A wave turned me over and I was finally able to breathe and scream for help. Or so I thought. As it turns out, you can't scream if you can't fill your lungs properly. All I could do was produce an indoor voice call for help. Since this was during a school trip, I was actually surrounded by other students. One of them saw me and assumed I was just enjoying myself until she saw the blood on my lip. Had I not inadvertently bitten my lower lip as I jumped, I would probably not be writing this. A year in physical rehab got me to recover a good deal of sensation and mobility. I'm no longer just a head, but I did get a severe, life-lasting disability. I wish I could say I'm used to it and doing well, but that's just not true. I get chronic pain, and today is a particularly difficult day. It's not all bad, though. Most days are worth living, and I still have dreams and ambitions. I might not be the smartest or the strongest, but I'm definitely the most perseverant person I know, and I'll become an urbanist and immigrate to Spain, even if I have to crawl all the way there. If you're not bored of my story yet and want to watch a dramatization of it featuring Javier Bardem, check out Marin Dentro's accident scene. I have the same injury but refuse to willingly die just yet, with all due respect to those who choose otherwise. Story 10. While whitewater rafting, my raft was going through rapids when I got ejected from the raft and sent underwater. I swam up and hit my helmet on a rock. It was pretty dark and murky. That is when I realized that I had been pushed by the current either underwater a rock outcrop or into an underwater cave. I'm not really sure which. Trying my best not to panic, I did the only thing I could think of. Used my hands to grip the rock and push myself against the current while kicking. After what felt like an eternity underwater, but it was probably no more than about 2 or 3 minutes, I noticed the light was getting brighter, and before I knew it, I had reached the surface. Once at the surface, the current of the rapids shot me downstream and I floated to the nearest bank of the river to collect myself. Edit. It has been pointed out that it is unlikely I was underwater for that length of time. I agree that my memory during such a stressful event is probably unreliable, so I will add that the length of time I was underwater was long enough for the rest of my group to become concerned about my well-being. But I would like to say that I don't think I possess any significant ability to hold my breath. I was a fairly fit teenager at the time, but I honestly think most of you reading this under those circumstances would be able to hold your breath for much longer than you think. Survival instincts are a heck of a thing. Story 11. Car accident moped versus Oldsmobile. I was the moped driver. Straight road car turns from the oncoming lane across traffic. Being a newish motorcycle driver, moped, I knew enough to know I was effed. But instead of putting it down or turning or anything, I took my hands off the steering and wrapped my head as I impacted, no helmet, inverting both knees on the handlebars, breaking the key off inside my right knee and dislocation of my right shoulder as I spun into the windshield, shattering it, and dislocating my hip on the concrete. My ignorance saved my life. A seasoned rider would have put the bike down and likely been run over. And my taking the hands off the steering saved my fingers, saved my head and neck to an extent, and the shoulder, my right, was the arm that wrapped my head first, and the impact dislocated it, and it would have been my head if I hadn't. Impact speed was 50 miles per hour. Not a single broken bone, but permanently effed my back. And realistically, I should be dead. Story 13. 3 times come to mind for me. First, drunk driver going 100 plus miles per hour hit my vehicle. They were coming down the wrong side of the highway that late evening. I swerved and woke up in the floor of my truck. Second, Working in a restaurant, glasses straight out of the dishwasher. Grabbed 2 out of the rack for a table and one sheared at the base, fell and hit my wrist. 3 tourniquets at 3 different spots on my arm later, they were able to stop the bleeding. I was wearing a watch with a metal band and that stopped the glass from cutting further. Third, found out I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. Doctor said another 2 to 3 months without treatment and I'd have been dead. Finished chemo last month and in remission. Anyone know a good gift for their guardian angel? Mine has been working overtime. Story 14. When I was young, my first car was a junker. The driver's seat was held upright by 2x4 wedged against the back seat. If you took it out, the seat went flat below the window line of the car. I was working nights and fell asleep behind the wheel and woke up to the roof of my car about 2 inches from my nose and the fireman betting how many pieces of my body was in. I politely told them to be careful. I was still alive. Walked away with a few cuts from the glass. My car had flipped sideways on the country highway by a bridge ravine and gotten wedged between 2 trees. Apparently, the other miracle is the way it was wedged. All the gas drained out of the tank, so it didn't go kaboom. Story 15. I was driving on an interstate approaching an interchange when I saw several cop cars racing the wrong way at me down the ramp. I was so focused on where they were going to go and how I could get out of their way that I didn't see the car that was running from them barreling at me at the left lane. Thankfully, I chose the right shoulder and didn't get in the left lane, or I would have been hit head on. I watched in horror behind me as that car ended up crashing into a semi that tried to move into the left shoulder to avoid him. Had I been just a few seconds later or gotten in that lane to avoid the cops, that would have been me. As if the crash itself wouldn't have been bad enough, I was in a tiny early 90s Mazda MX-3, and I know I would have been only wearing a shoulder belt because that car had the automatic seat belts, and I didn't use the lap belt back then. Would have been my last day for sure. No idea what pushed my wheel to the right side, but I'm lucky it did. Story 16. My best was the morning that I showed up at urgent care, then a hospital, featuring a burst pupil and a fever that should have been impossible to survive. I'd been treating some ugly symptoms with the gym for a couple of years, but however, surprisingly, working out isn't how you fix brain cancer. Shortly before that occurred, I woke up one night to floodlights and tones. I felt so much pain and sickness that it seemed like I'd die, and I didn't know the woman telling me to come with her. But it felt like a dream, so I did, and realized as we were climbing into an ambulance that she was the medic I'd been running with for a long time. I still felt awful, but it was a lot better by the time we were on scene. I had to cut a car, and we drove back. I was feeling well. I still suspect that hydrocephalus would have killed me that night if it hadn't been for that call. For months before that, I'd been losing my radial pulse when holding still too long. A couple runners up, very first house fire as a new firefighter, beams struck inches on either side of me but didn't hit me directly. While looking for a source of the fire, my officer and I discovered that we were standing on an incredibly hot floor. Anaphylaxis from a handful of causes. Before my second craniotomy, medical aid and dying was on the table, as my cancer was expected to be far more malignant. I considered it very carefully. Armed drunken redneck who forgot he called 911. Drunk driver deciding to plow through the scene of a vehicle extrication while I was cutting the car. Multiple drunks with knives and one with the bloody shard of glass. Severe autoimmune disease as a small child, asthma as an older child, and a couple of near drownings in the ocean and whitewater. Story 17. Driving at night on a dark, small back road, trees on both sides. With me were 3 ladies, who were just telling me that these roads were so dangerous because this time of year farmers come bolting down the roads with their heavy, "Who needs lights? YOLO!" machinery. In the corner of my eye, between the trees, I see a little reflector. The reflector is low to the ground, but I suddenly realize it is moving towards the road I am on, and I brake the car in a reflex. Next thing I know, I have to brake completely because this gigantic, dark, unlit tractor trailer turns on the road in a hurry. Nobody in the car realized it was there, and we were all scanning the side road, as we were just talking about the danger. If I would have continued driving, I would have driven the car into that thing without knowing what had happened to me. It reminds me of my colleagues in Africa, who keep telling me I should stop worrying about the trucks you can see coming towards you, and start worrying about the trucks you cannot see coming your way. Story 18. Walking through a Dutch town at Old Year's Eve, loud bang and 15 centimeters next to my head, a large metal traffic sign stuck in the wall which somebody blew off a pole 25 meters away. On a holiday with a huge hangover, me and a friend decided to swim to a pizzeria on the other side of a 3-kilometer wide lake. Halfway, we both were completely exhausted and very much undercooled, with large purple spots appearing on our bodies. And when we started to be convinced that we'd die, a random tourist in a small fishing boat appeared and took us in. Falling 9 meters down at work, but landed in and the only sand pile, due to construction works on the rest for a concrete floor. Sliding with the bike on a wet road and went under a bus from the side and came out in the back without hitting anything. I should be dead. Story 19. Believe it or not, but a big stone flower pot thing fell just an inch behind me from above when I was walking in an ancient town of Split, Croatia. First I heard the noise, then I saw my sister and my mom looking at me in shock. And then when I realized what happened and how if I had walked half a second slower, I would have probably died, or at least suffered a brain injury that would have required surgery. I actually started crying right there. No idea why, I guess it was more of a delayed, startled reaction, and the tears were the outlet. Obviously, physically I was completely fine, but when I think back on it, it really changed my outlook on life and death and how it can suddenly all be over because of nothing more than a freak accident. Story 20. This was all years ago, but I still get the shivers over it. I was in the army, deployed to the Gulf. We had a short humpback of about 20 kicks, but I'd hurt my knee the previous day, falling of about 113 trying to pee on someone. Separate story. Anyway, they needed someone to drive a deuce and a half full of water bottles to another unit, offload and take all their trash. I volunteered just to get out of the road march, make the drive and start the swapping process. Get finished and the other guy's truck is full of boxes of water and mine trash bags. I'm completely full, but there was one bag left. He tried and tried to get it in, but there was just no room. So I told him, dude, you just have to keep that one. He tossed it in the back of his and we started to leave. About 10 seconds after we pulled away, we heard and felt the explosion. We are fine, but the other truck is just mangled. Turns out some idiot had picked up what we guess was a bomblet from a cluster bomb and put it in the trash. It was in that last bag. The other two guys in the truck were pretty shaken, but the water absorbed most of the blast. Had that last bag made it on my truck, I wouldn't be here today. Story 21. I lived in the attic of an apartment of an old Victorian house. I kept hearing noises in the walls until one night I woke up to a room full of bats. Needless to say, I didn't want to live in an apartment infested with bats, so some friends of mine said I could live in their extra room. I moved really quickly because bats. Ugh. Anyway, 2 days later, the entire old Victorian house went up in flames and burned down to the ground. I thought, whew, got out of there just in time, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days after that, some detectives showed up on campus where I had class and asked to speak with me. They started asking me all these questions about whether or not I knew this guy who lived in the basement of the old house. I explained that I may have said hi in passing a few times, but that was it. Well, it turns out that the guy was obsessed with me, moved into the basement of the building because I lived there, and he freaked out and set the fire when I left because he didn't know where I went. I had no idea. They found a bunch of pictures of me and all kinds of creepy crap in his belongings. Luckily, no one was hurt in the fire, and he went to prison for arson, which carries a stiffer penalty than stalking. I love bats now. Bats are my friend. Thank you, bats. Story 22. I've had a bad habit of narrowly missing or dying or being severely maimed while hiking. I do a lot of bushwhacking, and I've had 2 times where I was inches from being straight killed by a falling tree. The first one was extra spooky. Me and some friends stopped to take a break, and we were using a fallen tree that was still attached to the trunk, making a right angle. My friend sat in the tree while I was stupidly sat under it in the triangle. We hung out for maybe 15 minutes, then got up to keep going. Right as we started walking away, the tree fell all the way to the ground right where I had been seconds before, and that tree was easily big enough to kill me. Another big tree missed me by inches when I lightly bumped it and the top fell off. Last fall, I stepped over a log and the ground gave way under me, and I fell about 6 inches. I was standing directly over a sharp branch pointed right at my groin. If I fell another 2 inches, I would have been in a lot of pain. 3 inches, and that sucker would have impaled me in the groin. Lots of hiking. I always tell myself I'm going to be extra careful from now on and then end up having another way too close call before long. Story 23. Not sure if this counts, but I had just gotten a new car in my last year of college before my prior one had been totaled a month prior by an impaired driver T-boning me, also in a near-death experience. I got a little lip spoiler to put on the trunk that came in the day before, but I didn't have time to put it on. This day, I got up early for church so I could put it on before I went. I left to go to church and everything was fine initially. Things changed when I got on the freeway flyover. I think that's what it's called. Basically a big ramp that curves at the apex then brings you back down. As I was climbing and just about to hit the curved part of it, I lost complete control of my car. I was swerving left and right and heading straight for the barricade. Not speeding, but probably fast enough to either eject me from the seat plummeting to my death, seatbelt was on, or give me very, very serious injuries. I did everything I could. I slammed on the brakes, tried to counter the steering. I even reached for the handbrake that I couldn't find. I ended up correcting the steering and coming to a stop just before I hit the barrier. I evened out and rode the flyover down to where it was level and pulled over to the side to collect myself as I was shaking and hyperventilating. To this day, I remember the car that was right behind me, passing me, and the expression on the face of the lady in the passenger seat after what all just transpired. I hope you tithed extra when you made it to church that day. Shoo doggy. Story 24. I've been close to death 4 times. First time when I was born, I literally shot out of my mom and the midwife only just managed to catch me before I hit the floor. Second time when I was around 8 or 9, I fell from one of those raised sand pens. I landed in a way that should have broken my neck because in theory I could not have landed beneath the large tree trunk right beside it without hitting the back of my head on it. Third time I was skiing. I lost control of my skis down a mountain and went off course. I hit a tree really hard. If I hadn't been stopped by that tree, I would have tumbled over the edge and fallen down the mountain. Fourth time was when I gave birth to my stillborn son. An hour or so after giving birth, I started bleeding a lot and was rushed to the operating room. Story 25. I've shared this a few times, but I had a near-death experience of drowning when I was a child. My dad was tossing me gently up in the air, so I'd have a little splash in my aunt's pool and I kept shouting, "Higher!" like any kid would. But my dad is not a good dad. So the last time he did it, I remember being tossed high enough I could see the roof of my aunt's house, and in the free fall, I had time to think about, this is gonna hurt. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't feel the impact and I woke up under the water, but it was wrong. I could breathe the water. It was infinite instead of being able to see the walls and touch them after 2 strokes, and it was dozens of feet deep instead of the 3 feet it was designed as. I swam and swam thinking I was a mermaid, and yet aware I was probably dead, because I knew even by then he'd kill me someday. So why be upset he succeeded? Probably better for me. I don't know how long it felt, like an hour, but eventually a big light was seen above me and asked me if I wanted to stay or go. And I said go, because I didn't want to be alive with my family anymore. But for some reason, I backed down and swam to the surface, and it was so hard I almost didn't make it anyway. When I broke the surface, I was visibly drowning and flailing, but I managed to force myself to vomit and cough out the water by sheer panic, as all my dad did was smack my back a few times while my aunts and grandma yelled at me for ruining the water. I got tossed out onto the gravel and took myself inside, and that was it. Still here, I guess, so must be a reason for it. Story 26. I was boogie boarding in 10 to 15 foot surf at high tide. Saw a wave I wanted, as did another surfer, and we raced to get priority position, and I was late. 12-footer crashed on my head and sent me to the bottom, which had happened hundreds of times in my life, but this time, while being tossed like a rag doll underwater, my boogie board and leash had wrapped around my legs twice and pinned my left arm to my side. I couldn't kick or use my dominant arm to swim, but it really didn't matter, as the wave tosses you so much you don't know which way is up. The wave was holding me down, and since it was high tide, I couldn't feel the bottom. I was running out of air and beginning to panic. I suddenly had a moment of clarity and said to myself, if you don't calm down, you're gonna die. I relaxed, and I let the wave take me. What felt like a split second later, I felt one of my fins on my foot hit sand. The bottom! I rocketed it out of the water and took the biggest breath of air that was the saltiest breath of my life. I climbed over the boulders overlooking the spot, shaking terribly. Not because I was cold, but realizing I had survived. I sat there with my board for about 15 minutes, watching some really good waves on a military base called Point Mugu. There was hardly anyone there, 4 of us at one of the best surf spots on the entire west coast. After calming down, I thought to myself, the surf is hardly this good and big. I grabbed my board and launched off the rocks and rode a few more waves at the sunset. Story 27. Most recent one was pure luck and a freak accident. Was cutting trim for our house using a miter saw on a beautiful clear day in the middle of COVID. No wind or clouds present, but high humidity. Went to make my last cut, but glasses fogged up. Removed my safety glasses so I wouldn't amputate my thumb. Blade spun up, lowered it to cut. Wind appears and blew a previous offcut into the spinning blade. The blade picked up the offcut and flung it into my right eye at 140 miles an hour. The piece carries the same kinetic energy as the right hook from Mike Tyson. Thankfully, the face of the piece that pushed my eye back was 5 millimeters too big in both directions to fully enter my eye socket. Hospital was effing useless, except the one eye doctor that skillfully removed what he could from my eyeball. Never saw a nurse, general practitioner, neurologist, etc. No medicine or head injury examination was given. Got literally dumped on the sidewalk after the material got pulled from my eye. F.U. of M. Took 30 days to be able to see light, 12 weeks for my pupil to return to normal-ish size, and 12 months for my eye to eject the last piece of wood. Took 3 years for my brain to function fully again. I should have just cut my thumb off. Story 28. Mortar attack in Vietnam. Those things were luck personified. We were exploring a vast, abandoned NVA camp under the jungle in the mountains northwest of Hue, shortly after the 1968 Tet Offensive. The NVA had left a cadre to keep the camp up to snuff, but the NVA that went into Hue did not make it back home to their mountain of bivouac. So there were lots of fighting holes handy for us to take cover. Lucky, right? My recon sergeant and I dove into the same hole as the mortar rounds approached. He got there first. I piled in on top of him and told him to hunker down. He did. The mortar rounds came through. I jumped up to get my radio to arrange counter battery, my job, and my sergeant said, "Lieutenant, I'm hit." I told him, "You can't be hit. You were under me." But he was hit, and he died about a half an hour later. Near as I can tell, the shrapnel went under my arm and drilled a hole in his neck. There were all kinds of luck running around that day. Some of it good, some of it bad. None of it was fun to die of or to live on with. If that was good luck for me, I'll settle for no more luck at all. It still stings 56 years later. I wrote it all up on Reddit maybe 10 years ago. It's relevant to the topic. It's all about luck. Fair warning, it's a long story and it's still happening. Story 39. Fainting in the hospital saved my life. If I'd been anywhere else, I would have died. Was even on the same door's ICU where they took me afterwards. I was in the hospital because it was 2 to 3 days after having super invasive surgery to remove a tumor from the inside of my spinal cord. They'd worked on my C4, C7, and I will always have an incomplete spinal cord injury. Anywho, my left side was numb all over, and I couldn't move anything. I'd just gotten my arm to move that morning, but still couldn't use my hand. I had to pee, and we discovered I'd started my period in the midst of the chaos. So the lovely CNAs ran over to maternity and brought me back some of those mesh disposable afterbirth panties with some pads made into them. As numb as my junk was, they were comfy. Felt like Always brand Infinity Flex foam pads in the light blue box. I have no kiddos, but mamas, if y'all want comfy pads, I recommend these ones. They had me on this weird sitting walker that had handles like an elliptical machine, and a little gate that closed under your butt, and you basically wall squat into this thing. Took me to the bathroom, got me leaning forwards and kind of standing. We're cleaning up, I'm helping with my good arm, and the dizzy hits as they're pulling my panties right up over my butt. I remember her saying, could you stand straight as you can and try to lean a little to the right? You're crooked and you're leaning, honey. So I did. She asked me if I felt better. I nodded yes, but said, but I can't hear anything. And next thing I know, 3 ladies are holding me and one says, you passed out a little. Then I was on the bed and the nurse was doing chest compressions with one hand and reaching for the code button with the other. I just stared till she noticed me. Then we both started crying and she was freaking out and apologizing while I was freaking out, thanking her and hugging her with my good arm. I was surrounded by doctors and hadn't realized I was so out of it. I was taken to the ICU at 4:30 a.m. and had spent 4 days there until my heart finally got a little stronger and the spinal shock wore off and I could safely be upright. That was 7 years ago. I can walk and my left hand works decent, but it's still numb and probably always will be. I get dizzy at least once a day, but I just sit down and let it ride until I can get back up again. I have PTSD from the injury and hospital stay, but I'm grateful to be alive. I think about that night a lot, especially when I do things we didn't think I'd ever be able to do again. Dear everyone with an SEI who is not mobile, I do it for you. Story 30. Driving my moped home from school, 9 p.m. I'd worked all day. I was a plaintiff personal injury paralegal at the time, collected and wrote settlement letters to insurance companies. I was dreaming about making mac and cheese when I got home when suddenly I heard a very loud noise. Remember thinking, oh crap, this is bad, I'm not getting that mac and cheese tonight, and then waking up on my back on the street in front of Straub Hospital, where 2 night workers who didn't speak English were trying to help me by gathering my shoes that blew off, my skirt that was over my butt. I had a headache so huge, oh my gosh. Ambulance came and took me to Queens Medical Center. Don't know why not Straub. I was literally 50 feet from their doorway. A man who had gotten a weekend pass from the psych ward took his brother's taxi cab but didn't take his antipsychotic meds. Said he got dizzy while driving and rear-ended me when he swerved into my lane. He panicked and hit and ran. He ended up at a gas station a few miles away, stopped to get gas, and someone there saw the basket from the back of my moped that was crunched and connected to the grill of the car that had all my personal info. His windshield was cracked. Police showed up because they were looking for a car at that point. I got so lucky the windshield still had my hair and skin stuck to it, lol, and I was seriously bruised up. My neck hurt, my lower back from my basket hitting it before I rolled over the car and landed on my back, I guess. I have a thick, ropey scar on the back of my head where it hit the street. Doc sewed it up without numbing it. That hurt like F, but no broken bones. I made a pretty quick recovery and back at work part-time within a week, using a cane for my effed up knee. I still have scars on my knees and knuckles from the road rash, but neck still bugs me. My right knee swells when it's going to rain, but I got off lucky. It could have ended up so bad. My firm worked out a nice settlement with his insurance company and I got the transfer to a better college. Man, I've been lucky enough to not have been hit or get in any accident on my motorcycle yet, but these stories are scaring me, dude. We've had a good few years, but I'm thinking about wrapping it up. Might be time for a minivan. I want to live. Story 31. Was sitting in the back seat of a 1981 Chevy Citation completely still at a red light with no seatbelt on. A semi hit us doing 60 to 70 miles per hour and all four of us walked away. I had 13 stitches in the back of my head. I have 3 fun theories. 1. I am just too hard-headed. 2. Heaven doesn't want me, and hell is afraid I will take over. Or 3. You cannot keep a good man down. The odds are a mix of 1 and 2. I have also been held at gunpoint with a .40 caliber Glock to the chest. I got out of that by fighting crazy with crazy. I finally reached up, pushed the gun harder into my chest, and asked my ex if she thought that was going to get rid of me. She laughed and said she knew it would. I laughed harder and said, "No, I will be right back. I will make a deal with the first devil I see." It stunned her so much that she lowered the gun. I took it and left. I sat in my car for 15 minutes or so just shaking. She was untreated bipolar, and I really thought I was going to die. The crazy statement I made at the end was just a last-second Hail Mary to see if it would work. Story 32. In 2014, I was doing this project of documenting and writing up Canadian military monuments. I grew up in Ottawa, but moved to the GTA and hadn't been back in a while. There was a Leafs game in Ottawa, and I was going to use that as a reason to drive up, stay with a friend, and photograph the cenotaph and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in downtown Ottawa. It was a perfect arrangement because my friend worked at the bank right across the street from the memorial. I was going to drive him to work and do some photography first thing in the morning. Day of my trip, I wake up absolutely sick as F. I was unable to even get out of bed. It was so bad. I called my friend and canceled, and just gave him my tickets to the hockey game. The morning I was going to be there, a guy went on a shooting spree and killed one of the honor guards at the war memorial I was going to visit. The timing of my trip and my driving my friend to work would have put me there at exactly that moment. It took a while for me to reconcile the fact my life could be very different or over if I had not gotten sick that morning. Conversely, if I had been there, could I have seen him coming and the outcome would have been different for everyone else? I don't know. Story 33. I was walking to school after waking up late and was in a rush while crossing the road. I saw out of the corner of my eye that the light to my left was red, and I couldn't hear a car, so I just thought it was safe. But I had my earphones in, and I didn't look up to see the absolute idiot doing 60 down a main road running the red light. But at the same time, I got a message, and I took a second to read it before I stepped off the island to cross. I was maybe half a second late to being turned into meat paste. On the same road at the same light, I grabbed someone when they were about to be pretty much the same thing and stopped them walking out in front of a bus running the light. I effing hate Manchester Road, but people also need to get off their phones while walking around. Please be aware of your surroundings. Story 34. I was in ROTC in college and did a field training exercise. The night we were doing nighttime land navigating through the woods. At some point we heard loud, echoey cracking. Suddenly something hit my shoulder hard enough to stun me and I yelped. There was also a huge crash next to me. My group freaked out and swiveled their flashlights in my direction because apparently they thought I'd been squashed by a huge tree that fell. I didn't see it fall, but they sure did. Lo and behold, there was a downed tree next to me. I guess I got hit by falling tree bits or something when it was going on its way down, but not by the tree itself. But the group was so rattled that the senior cadet, NCO, that was in charge of us completely forgot how to read a map from that point on. The other cadets kept asking if I was okay. Eventually, I had to take a point and finish the exercise with these guys lumbering after me the entire time, asking if I was sure that I was okay. Afterwards, we checked in with our cadre, and they all just simultaneously tell the poor captain and master sergeant that I'd almost been killed by a tree. The captain just went, "He almost got taken out by a tree and your team was still the first back? Good hustle." Story 35. I have my own story and a story of my mom's and one of my dad's. I can't know for sure if it would have killed me, but as a kid I was taking a bath, and for some reason I scooted forward a bit, when suddenly a very heavy ceramic air vent fell down exactly where my head would have been. When my mom was a kid, she was sunbathing on her grandma's lawn when she suddenly got this stabbing pain in her stomach and ran to her grandma. A few seconds later, a truck filled with gravel came crashing down from the hill above and ran right over the blanket my mom had been lying on. When I was like 4, my dad worked as a postman. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but in their cars, the driver's seat is on the right side instead of the left, so they have easy access to the mailboxes. He was driving one day, probably way too fast because he always does, and he hit ice. The car hit the ditch and flew in the air, hitting a tree, smashing the entire left side of the car. Had he driven a normal car, he would be very dead now. Did he learn his lesson? Not at all. Story 36. Got stabbed to death in Edmonton, Alberta while drunk and high off the mushrooms after a 2019 Halloween howler. 7 stabs in the back while I was busy fighting with someone else after getting jumped after the party. All the punctures were very deep and on the upper left-hand side close to the spine and the heart. Doctor said it's a miracle that the knife didn't hit my heart or spine, and the investigator said the scene where it happened was the bloodiest he had ever seen in his 23 years on the force. I got away, or they stopped chasing me, and once I stopped, I got dizzy and tired and passed out under the streetlights in the neighborhood of Laurel. Woke up in the hospital the next morning after surgery. Someone in the neighborhood found me and called the ambulance. It was like 3 in the morning in a quiet and isolated neighborhood. Who found me, or how they found me, I'll never know, died in the back of the ambulance and had to be resuscitated. Lost so much blood that the doctor said if I had laid there for 5 more minutes, I wouldn't have been able to survive. Since then, I've gotten away from gang life, met a woman that loves me as much as I love her, had a child together, and got myself sober. Edit. Weirdly enough, all of my life I had a fascination with the 27 Club, after reading up on it after Kurt Cobain's self-unalives. If I had remained dead that night, I would have died at 27 years old. I'm glad he clarified the violence was a result of gang life, because I've been to Edmonton a few times recently and it's freaking beautiful. I didn't want to stop going to avoid that. Granted, I'm mostly talking about the mall and a few other places. I don't know how safe the other suburbs are. Story 37. My airbag and seatbelt. It broke my ribs and the airbag broke my face, but I lived. I was passenger and caught the impact of a cement median on a curved interstate at night in hail downpour. Hydroplaning, spinning, and caught the second impact as well on the spin. I got out of the car through the passenger window and walked into the ambulance and laid down, joking. No pain. They looked at me like they saw a ghost. Told me I'm lucky to be alive. Once we pulled into the ER, the pain hit me like bricks landing on my chest. All left side, ribs broken, and one corner of the clavicle broke off and launched itself under my left breast. I've got a fun bump there now. I barely escaped a lung puncture by half an inch. My seatbelt also left a nice little laceration on the side of my neck. My face recovered fast as F. I had a broken nose and sprained jaw. Other than raccoon eyes for a few months, I'm fine. 9 years later, I still have a bruise that shows up when I'm sick or exhausted right under my left eye. Broken ribs suck, by the way. Ain't crap they can do for you. I had a cold that got to bronchitis 3 months after the accident, and let me tell you, misery. But hey, I survived. They still hurt whenever the weather is crappy. Story 38. I was getting on the turnpike while driving my kids to a birthday party. There was a tractor trailer to my right and maybe a 10-year-old Hyundai in front of me. The entrance to the toll booth is essentially a 2-lane U-turn, but wide enough that you can take it relatively quickly in comparison to most. However, I had just gotten a new truck that I wasn't comfortable with yet. I had the same model for years and years leading up to this new one, plus I didn't get my license till I was 30, Brooklyn living, and it was raining out, so the circumstances, I drove unusually slow. The tractor trailer is obviously huge, so he's still on my right, but the Hyundai was out of sight, till I got to the point where the turn was straightening. We were facing each other. He had taken the turn too fast and spun out. I watched, unable to breathe, as the back of his car went under the tractor trailer in between 2 sets of its wheels. He straightened out, got to where the lanes opened up, and just sat. When I passed him, he was staring ahead as if his eyes didn't work. If I'd been driving even a bit closer to my normal speed when he spun out, he would have hit the nose of my car into the concrete divider to our left and pushed the bag, where my babies were, into the tractor trailer. If the Hyundai driver wasn't able to save himself, I would assume that would cause the tractor trailer to hit me as well. My last vision would have been watching someone else die. At the time, I worked for the manufacturer of the vehicle, and shockingly, I was not scared at any point. The company was awful, but the vehicles are safe AF. Story 39. I was having drinks with one of my friend's friend at a local mart. Then we decided to go home, and eventually the friend that I knew had gone back before us had just met for the first time, and we were staying a bit later. Unfortunately, after that, he decided to drop me home, as I remember at that time I don't have drivers, since after having a talk about our home is that his and mine is near to each other, so I decided to let him drop me home, and this is what's happening when I'm on the way home, him crashing to the median and me being in the motorcycle with him on the way home. After I wake up, he's already gone. The lucky is that he's the driver and wear helmet, as I remember, and I don't, and I can't remember what was the speed that was on that night. The thing is, I am horribly injured and lose one of the eyesight, moreover staying in the hospital for almost 2 months. The most cruel moment of my life is that we decided to start our friendship and shake hands a lot before we decided to go home, which is a traumatic event in my life till now. Story 40. Let me count the ways. I'll relate 2 of them here. When I was 10 years old, I was riding my horse. On this particular day, I took her outside of the pasture to ride her. I never put her in anything faster than a walk. While I was on her back, a car in a neighboring yard backfired and spooked the horse. She took off at top speed with me on her back and headed towards the apple orchard that bordered our property. Before I saw it coming, a limb of an apple tree caught me square in the forehead. I flew backward off of my horse and landed with a heavy thud on my back. It was a similar accident to the one that paralyzed Christopher Reeves, Superman, from the neck down. After a few moments, I slowly stand up, shake off the stars, and walked back to the house with my wits and motor abilities intact. Fast forward 36 years later, I was walking home one night after attending a sporting event. I noticed 2 people walking toward me, and then both of them, at the same time, quickly jumped off the sidewalk and stepped about 10 feet back. At that moment, I felt the heat of a car's front end on the back of my legs. Just as quickly, a white car sped out from behind me and up the street. It was as if something picked that car up and threw it on the street before it could hit me. It happened so fast. That's actually insane that he took a hit like that and just walked it off without any permanent injury. Be careful riding horses, guys, lest Eminem write a song about you. Story 41. I almost got crushed to death by an 18-wheeler. Sunday morning, January 9th, 2000. I was driving on the interstate around an uphill banked curve. It had just started raining. I was in the center of 3 lanes in a Chevy 1500 pickup truck. The orange Schneider truck in the right lane beside me started coming over into my lane. He was sliding sideways down the banked curve on the slick pavement, but I didn't know that yet. I thought, oh, okay, he probably wants to get over around the slower moving traffic ahead of him to keep his momentum up. I quickly got into the left lane. Suddenly, he slid sideways right into me and crunch, bam, crunched my truck into the concrete median wall. I was sandwiched between the median wall on my left and the giant orange wall of the Schneider trailer on my right and was being dragged along with the truck. My truck was kind of skipping along the median wall like a skimming stone on water. The cab was getting crunched narrower and narrower by the trailer. With every skip, I was terrified and cried out at the top of my lungs, "God help me! Jesus!" Suddenly, it all stopped. I was sitting in the front seat with broken glass all around me. I heard a shh sound of air escaping from somewhere. I thought, I've got to get out of here. I scrambled out of the broken back glass window and ran a short distance down the shoulder of the road. I looked up at the truck and saw the driver slowly stand up on his running board and look back at my truck. I yelled and waved at him. "Hey, I'm okay!" He clutched his chest and told me later, "I thought for sure I'd killed you." It was his first accident in 20 years of commercial driving. The accident made the local evening news that night and the front of the local section of the newspaper the next day. 2 physical things saved my life that day, not discounting divine intervention. 1. His truck jackknifed during the slide, causing the front left corner of the cab to hit the median wall first and thus absorb a lot of his lateral momentum. And 2, the trailer was empty and wasn't carrying any extra weight. Otherwise, I would have been squashed like a bug. Story 42. I was 4 or 5 and we lived in the mountains in North Carolina. One of those spots where our driveway to get to our house was so steep it felt like climbing to go up. That year, my mom had bought me a big truck toy car, and I was buzzing around in the yard with it one day. I tried a turn near the edge of our yard, which sloped off into a long valley. As I'm making the turn, a wheel goes over, then another. As I somehow realize I'm about to fall, I cry out for her, and she comes running. But then I and my toy car tumble over the edge and down the rocky slope. Angle and distance are hard when you are 5, but it was steep and I probably tumbled end over end in that toy car for 30 to 50 feet. There was no seatbelt, No roll cage, no nothing. The fact that I didn't hit my head, break my neck, or get flung out, Mom treated it as nothing short of a miracle. When they brought me up to the house, I don't remember a house, but sitting in the rocking chair of a greenhouse garden that we do have, concussed maybe. Later, when I was older, I was out playing with a neighbor's son who was a few years older than me. Different neighborhood, but still in the mountains of North Carolina. We climbed down into a construction site being cut into the side of the hill for a new house, and then tried to climb our way out. Problem being that it was winter and the ground was cold. We couldn't climb it at first because our hands would get too cold. Luckily, we had one pair of gloves and shared between us as we made our way back up. Luckily, that would have been more of a we are inconvenienced, lost, and in trouble if we couldn't make the return climb. But a bad fall would have gone poorly since there were no adults or cell phones around. Story 43. I fell through the ice in a pool in mid-January when I was 9 years old. I was hardly tall enough to be in the pool with my head above water, and I was too short to climb from the pool without the aid of a ladder, which had been removed for winterization. I became trapped under the ice. I would try to surface for a breath and would only find more ice. Finally, after a few attempts, I found the hole I fell through, but the boys that dared me to step on the ice had all run away. I was trapped in this frozen pool fighting for my life in negative-degree temperatures at night. I could feel things on the bottom of the pool hitting my feet as I waited, sticks and debris that the boys had thrown through the ice in previous months. I luckily found a rake, of all things, and this was the boost I needed to get out of the pool. I managed to escape my fate in the winter to now be soaking wet in the most awful part of winter. I don't know if it was minutes or seconds, but I would trudge to my aunt and uncle's back porch where I would pass out on the concrete before making it to the door. I have no idea who found me or what happened after that took place. I would wake up later with only small flashes of nearly drowning in that pool and the empty coldness of walking soaked in winter. Story 44. Not me, but my patient. I was working one of the smallest hospitals in my country. It doesn't even have an ER. The OR isn't used every day. I was telling the next shift's nurse about my patient and told him he came in with a hemoglobin of 1.7 the day before. Before my colleague could ask me to repeat myself, a physician, who happened to overhear the conversation but didn't treat this patient, interjected, "That's incompatible with life." That's the one time I could truthfully reply, "Well, this patient disagrees." The patient got, I think, 8 or 10 blood transfusions over the course of a couple of days and then got discharged with an outpatient appointment to find out what actually happened. Story 45. Had responded to a fire in a small apartment building. The structure had been weakened enough from the fire and the water that the floor above me collapsed. I was directly under a bathroom and therefore a mud cement floor. From my perspective, there was a weird, really loud ripping sound above and around me, and then the ceiling collapsed with big chunks of cement and porcelain and wood and what have you crashing down. It seemed like it was all slow motion, but it probably took all of 3 seconds. Anyway, I was standing there, suddenly coated head to toe in mud and dust and surrounded by rubble. And so I looked up into the now yawning open hole above me, and there was one heavy wooden beam still intact, and I was standing directly underneath, my shoulders in line with it. The mud floor above me literally collapsed around me, and I was completely, physically fine. My squad runs in a few seconds later, and we're all just sort of staring at each other and the mess on the floor and the bathroom walls above, and my supervisor goes, "Well, guess you still have things to do." Story 46. I delivered pizzas off and on during my 20s and 30s. One evening, I was driving on a windy but familiar one-lane, two-way road that was flanked by forest on one side and houses on the other. This particular road inclined before reaching a junction that ran beside a set of railroad tracks. I was in the middle of a run and reached the incline where a large diesel truck was happening to climb the opposite way beside me. I had an instant to react when a car suddenly appeared that was trying to pass the slow-riding truck in my lane. I swerved onto the slim shoulder to narrowly avoid a head-on collision at about 50 miles per hour. I didn't have any time to be in shock or rage. I simply cursed the driver out for about 2 consecutive minutes as I continued and completed the delivery. I now believe in guardian angels and pray that the idiot driver had some sense and forfeited his license to use public transportation for the rest of his life. Story 47. When I was 16, one of my buddies and I built a zip line across the side yard of my parents' house. The starting point required climbing a tree, hooking the harness in, and jumping off at about 10 feet up. We had just finished making some tweaks to the design when I gave it another test run. Apparently, we forgot to completely tighten both of the clamps on one end, so as soon as I jumped, the line unraveled, sending me right down to the ground. I landed square on my back into the ivy below. Knocking the wind out of me, I laughed and then immediately stopped as I turned, and I saw that I had missed my skull being impaled by the sprinkler head hidden in the ivy by about 2 inches. I still get sleeved out thinking about how close I was to having the base of my skull shish kebabbed. Story 48. So, in 1994, the killer earthquake in Northridge, California struck on a Monday morning. At that time, I was working at a catering company doing meal service for Hollywood movies. The commissary, where the mobile kitchen trucks were located, was on the corner of Parthenia and Woodley Avenues in Northridge. I was always on time when I worked, but on this particular day, I requested the day off because I had to renew my car registration at the DMV. This was before all the online registration stuff. Our departure time from the commissary was scheduled for 4:15 a.m., but the guy who replaced me that day was like an hour late. Probably saved his life too. So the earthquake happened at 4:31 a.m. and the freeway overpass, Newhall Pass interchange, that collapsed and killed the CHP officer was about 16 minutes away from us and in the direction we had to go that day to the filming location. Had I not requested that day off, I'm certain that we would have been driving under that overpass within a minute of it collapsing. Story 49. When I was in 4th grade, my brother, my 3 neighbors, and I were playing in a wooded park near our house when we found an overflow drain in a small basin. 2 of my neighbors and I decided to climb into it since we were curious and small enough to fit into it. The best way I can describe it is as a large concrete box with slits near the top and a pipe at the bottom to funnel excess water out of the basin if it flooded. We were small enough to fit through the slits and grab the ladder that was there for maintenance. It was maybe 10 feet to the bottom where there was a large stick. I decided to try and break the stick with some of the rocks that were also down there, so I told the 2 neighbors down there with me to pick up a rock and help me smash the stick. The neighbor that remained outside the drain heard me say that and picked up a rock that was probably around 6 or 7 pounds and dropped it through one of the slits at the top. I heard the friends down there with me yell, "Watch out!" and I started to look up. The rock landed on my head just above my forehead. Luckily, I didn't pass out and managed to climb back out with the help of the people down there with me. One of them took their bike to go get my dad since we didn't know what else to do. My brother helped me walk back towards the house while I was bleeding profusely from my head. I don't remember much after that, but the next thing I remember was being in the ER getting staples to close the wound, and the doctor saying that the impact could have easily killed me. I still have a small bald spot just behind my hairline because of the scar. Story 50. I became lucky anytime I had a seizure, I would just end up in the hospital, luckily waking up. Anytime I have one, it happens when I sleep. One instance, as which it was happening, I thought I was dreaming, but I was actually awake as my family called emergencies to drive me to the hospital. There were paramedics and firefighters fighting with me on my bed, and I cursed them out, trying everything possible for them to let go of me. I bit my tongue like crazy during the seizure, and fighting with nearly 5 paramedics on my bed has caused my dang back to have awful pain, an awful shoulder, and just weak legs. I don't know why I was dreaming, but dang, the seizures freaking effed me up like crazy in my sleep. Story 51. Probably the 2 times I got lucky may not have been that exciting, but I'm grateful I didn't die. 1. Being a young hoodlum, friends and I were wandering around a construction site for a building. It was pitch black. Eventually, someone remembered they had a flashlight on their phone. This was when phones just started doing this, so it wasn't everyone's go-to solution yet. Turns out we'd been walking around an elevator shaft the whole time, which had absolutely 0 barriers around it. 2. Our townhouse caught fire. It was me and a few guys living there, still dumb kids I guess, because none of our fire detectors had batteries in them. Smoke was really bad and apparently no one was waking up because the air was so bad. Thankfully, one roommate was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, so he hadn't got consumed by the smoke and proceeded to wake up another roommate who was a volunteer firefighter. We got out of the house only minutes later to see the house immediately start spewing out tons of hot, black smoke at an alarming rate. I honestly didn't realize how bad it was until the firefighters on scene explained I was minutes away from dying. Story 52. I have 2. My dad is a very anxious person, so we went to the ER. I would never if I was alone, and it turned out to be sepsis. The other one is carbon monoxide poisoning. I was staying with my relatives and they went to another town to visit someone, so I was home alone. I took a shower, then felt my eyes burning. After 4 to 5 minutes, my ears also started to feel weird. I got scared and called them to let them know I might be getting sick. I woke up in the ICU, and my doc told me I was minutes away from death. Turns out my relatives stopped by a mall close to the house to get some gifts before they hit the road, and they were preparing to leave when I called them. They simply wanted to be safe and check on me. I am so thankful for that. Story 53. At a house upstate, a 30-minute drive from the nearest town, we had an ugly propane tank near the kitchen. To hide it, someone had the bright idea of stacking a decorative wood pile. 10 to 15 years later, someone else decided that the used logs in our fireplace were unsightly, but didn't want to just toss them, so they added them to the decorative pile. The wood in the decorative pile has never been used, ever, so it's old and brittle and under the top layer pretty dang dry. My friends and I are hanging in the room on the other side of the house when kids of my older brother's friends come running in screaming, "There's a fire by the gas tank." We grabbed fire extinguishers and also thankfully had an outdoor hose already hooked up. Kids had been playing water games and were able to get everyone to safety and put the fire out before it spread. But I had nightmares for weeks. Didn't know where my kid was at the time. She was with her nanny and would have been too long by the time fire rescue could arrive. We're lucky we weren't all blown to smithereens. Decorative wood pile is gone. We now also have a ton of smothering blankets in addition to fire extinguishers. And anyone who goes near the fireplace gets training and a lecture on safety. Story 54. I rock climb and have narrowly escaped death multiple times, but the best story was from just a couple of weeks ago. I was climbing about a 25 to 30 foot off the ground when I fell and the protection pulled out of the wall. I hit the ground head first, but walked away. The urgent care doctors were horrified and I decided to go home, and I take an Epsom soak before getting checked out. Some CT scans and x-rays later that they were bewildered I didn't have any injuries beyond the bruises and scrapes. I think during my fall my head hit the ground first but deflected to the side. I felt my neck crack, enough that the majority of the impact was taken by my shoulder. I also managed to land on some compacted dirt instead of some rocky outcroppings in the area. I was fortunately wearing a helmet, but I don't think it would have done much if I had gone headfirst into a rock. Story 55. Too long didn't read. If I swerved wrong, I would have either been a pancake or drove into concrete at 70 miles an hour. Tried passing a semi-truck on a rainy day on a poorly maintained Arkansas road. About halfway, semi-truck decides to speed up to 5 over the speed limit, so I pick up the pace to pass before the upcoming turn. My car hydroplanes and begins rotating left, and I'm looking at a ditch. I overcorrect to the right, and now I'm looking at tires of a semi-trailer that probably weigh more than my little blue Fiesta. I decided to go back toward the ditch. I'm repeating the word crap in my thoughts as my reaction wasn't to first hit the brakes. Now going alongside the road, directly beside trees moving about 75 miles an hour, concrete culvert comes up, like a tunnel that lets water flow. This one has a concrete exterior lip, and I clip it with my right tire. Car flips just enough for the roof to dig up some grass, but lands back down. Bushes slow my car considerably, and I stop. Pain. Not sure how much or where, but it's there. My phone that I kept on the passenger seat is gone, but I remember that I kept a second one in my pocket. I was working at an AT&T store at the time and kept it for testing customer phones without giving them my number because people are a-holes. I slowly reach for it to find that it's dead. Awesome. I unbuckle myself and reach toward the passenger side and find my other phone is actually totally fine. Call 911, refuse ambulance. I try to stand up and it's a little rough, but doable, until the shock sets in and it feels like I decided I didn't need blood anymore. I hear the truck driver calling out to me, but I gotta sit down before I pass out. Random passerby says they called 911. Thanks, dog. Another passerby is a retired paramedic and gives me a neck check. Seems fine. Police officer shows up, takes my statement as I lay flat across his back seat. I refrain from mentioning how fast I was going. Ambulance shows up anyway, charges me $1,400 to drive me to the nearby hospital and get my name wrong. The pain in my legs were minor scratches. The lingering pain in my lower back is 2 fractured transverse processes of the lumbar vertebrae. I ask if it's serious. He says I can wear a brace, but they're uncomfortable and I'll have to deal with the pain for a couple of weeks. Gives me a scary strong pain med prescription that I don't ever fill. Hospital is cold as F. Nearly pass out as they refuse to wheel me out for no reason. Can't walk without passing out for a couple of days. Forcing out farts is harder for like a year and I don't know why. Getting back on the road is horrifying for like a month. Story 56. I have a few. One time as I was walking home from school, I took my typical shortcut through the edge of the woods. Into the side door of my house. As I got about halfway through, I looked up from my feet to see a black bear with her 2 cubs, maybe 100 feet in front of me. Luckily, she had her head in a rabbit hutch and we had just finished raising chicks in, so didn't notice me. I grew up on a 90-odd acre farm where we'd regularly dig up trees for ball and burlap. However, anyone who's done this knows that it can be incredibly hard to see with a tree in your face. There were a few times that I narrowly avoided getting hit by a driver of the skid steer we used to dig them. The most memorable one being the time I helped a new guy situated in the machine who then proceeded to turn rapidly towards me. I jumped backwards out of the way and they tilted the forks the wrong way and dropped the tree inches in front of me. I have far too many more, as dodging death seems to be the only place I have any luck in life. Yeah, it can be dangerous work working around those skid steers. My brother was behind one and he was yelling to the guy operating it, "Don't back up, he's behind him." And obviously it's so loud the guy didn't hear him, so he backed up and ran over both of his legs. Somehow, completely fine, but, very dangerous. Story 57. When my ex told me she wanted a divorce, I decided to move back home for a bit to mentally recover. I had to drive through a couple of states and I wasn't able to get much sleep the night before. At some point, I had fallen asleep at the wheel and was woken up by a loud bang and what felt like me hitting something. There was a curve in the road just up ahead with a rather steep drop off the edge into a river that I probably would have ended up in if I stayed asleep. I pulled over and didn't see anything in the road behind me, and no signs of damage on the car. I had no idea what the noise was, but I was very happy it woke me up and I was able to complete the rest of the drive without incident. The next day, I went outside to unload the stuff I packed in my car and realized that half my roof rack was gone. Thankfully, I had nothing packed on the roof, but I assume that must have been the source of the noise that woke me up. That was probably the best timing it could have had. Side note, I was recently up for like 40 hours straight on my way to set one day, and I'm so tired and I'm driving at night and I try all the tricks, the loud music, the window down, ice water, the whole shebang, energy drinks. But I tell you what kept me up, man. Flamin' hot Cheetos or Takis or anything spicy that I don't normally eat. Like, it's not absurdly hot, but it's enough that it keeps you up, man. It works. Give it a try. I mean, actually, don't ever drive when you're too tired, but if you ever have to be driving, give it a shot and then report back to me. Unless that's dangerous, I don't advise it. I take no responsibility for anything that happens forward. Whew, got out of that one. Moving on. Story 58. I used to be a crane driver. We had a rigger who always used to stop everything to answer his phone every time it rang. It used to infuriate me to no end. One day we were doing a dual crane lift of a 30-ton concrete L-shaped panel. Mid-lift, his phone rings, and he walks away to chat to his mate. Literally a couple seconds later, a lifting eye failed and the panel swung in the opposite direction you would expect, slamming into the ground right where this rigger had been standing. If his mate hadn't called at that exact moment, or if he ignored the call like he should have, he would have turned into a pancake right in front of me. Story 59. By the way, this was in Miami, McDonald's on US 1. Some of you will get why that's important. I was hit by a pickup truck when I was riding my bike. I was on the sidewalk about to turn left into a McDonald's. Ford F-150 about to leave McDonald's and turn right onto the main road. Cars on the road are waiting to turn right into Mickey D's, and the first one waves me on. Mr. Ford thought they were waving him on. So I go to turn left and Mr. Ford speeds up probably to 15 from 0 instantly. Next thing I know, I'm literally vaulting over the handlebars. Not even realizing what happened, I turned around and Mr. Ford has my bike pinned under his truck in such a way that he could not drive away and I cannot get my bike. Long story short, he gave me some money and bought me a new bike and I didn't press charges. I always forget this happened to me too, but when I remember that this happened, it helps me appreciate life. Story 60. My driveway has a sort of retaining wall, so it's about a foot high on the paved side and 4 feet on the yard side. Our garden was right below on the yard side, so there was a bunch of garden tools lined up on the wall. I was about 4 years old. Not having paying any attention to, I was standing on the wall and obviously fell off somehow. I got really lucky. The garden tools that day happened to be a wheelbarrow and a pitchfork. I landed perfectly with the pitchfork catching the wheelbarrow and me under it. Think about how you would set up an animal trap with a stick holding up a cardboard box. It was exactly that. I probably would have been fine had the wheelbarrow landed on me, but the pitchfork is a different story. It landed fork side down 2 inches from the top of my head. It pinned me to the ground by my hair, and it took 2 of my dad's friends to free me. Had I landed slightly different, at best maybe my arm or chest would have been skewered. At worst, it would have went straight through my eyes or my neck. Story 61. Was removing an AC unit for a client while on the top floor fire escape of an older apartment building. The AC had been attached to the window frame from the outside, so I had to go out onto the fire escape to remove these screws. Went out the window and got to work. I was talking with the client, who was standing in the open window next to the one I was working on, when I shifted my back foot to get a better angle on one of the screws. Except I forgot about the rather large opening in the landing of the fire escape for the staircase down. So my rear foot only found air and away I went, tumbling down and away from the building. I was 100% sure I was going to die. Though perhaps surprisingly, I didn't think of my wife or kids or even really feel fear. It was just a rush of thoughts and feeling that can only be summed up as, really? This is how I go. Oh my gosh. Combined with the mental image of my corpse in the courtyard far below. Luckily for me, I bashed my head against the outer edge of the landing as I fell, which altered my trajectory enough so I landed on the fire escape, landing one floor down. Scared the crap out of the client and needed some stitches, but otherwise was mostly unharmed. Story 62. Fell backwards down the stairs. I was very drunk and was on a night out in Edinburgh. If you don't know cities like Edinburgh or London, they have access to basements and big old houses from the front. There's usually a little staircase down to a small area outside the basement front window and door. The stairs down will of course be paved stone or concrete, and they often have a metal fence along the front with a metal gate at the top of the stairs. I sat back on what I thought was the fence, but I was so drunk I wasn't even checking. It was the gate and it swung open. I fell backwards through the air and landed on the midway point of the stairs where it turns 90 degrees, and I hit my head hard on the brick wall. Everyone was freaking out, but I managed to get up and insisted I was fine. I wouldn't let them call an ambulance or anything, and I continued my night out. About 5 a.m., I woke up in my friend's apartment where I was staying and was vomiting in the bathroom. I somehow managed to vomit on the floor and was super disoriented, like way more than being drunk, like concussion disorientation. I then had a shower and went to my friend's bedroom wrapped in the world's smallest hand towel and curled up naked at the foot of her bed. I remember feeling like I was not okay. The next day I was hungover but also in so much pain from my muscles all over my body, and I vomited multiple times during the day. A month or so later, I developed a lot of severe pain, and eventually it turned out I have nerve damage from the fall and have been on a lot of medication since. I later found out that the only reason I am alive and not paralyzed from hitting a brick wall head first is because I was drunk enough that my muscles relaxed and was so floppy. It's apparently one of the reasons that drunk drivers can survive horrific crashes that would kill a sober driver. And beyond that, it was just pure luck that my concussion was mild enough not to cause lasting brain damage, and that I didn't fall in a way that snapped my neck or severed my spinal cord. I'd definitely take a lifetime of medication and physical therapy than paralysis or death. Story 63. I was about 20 years old living in Boston right off the Riverway MBTA stop on the Green Line. This was an above-ground stop on a light rail and not an underground subway, so the T dropped you off in the middle of the street and threw up a little stop sign and warning lights so you could cross to the sidewalk. I was riding home from work and making a little bit of a friendly chit-chat with a driver I saw pretty often on my commute, so I was the last person off. Gotta emphasize that I wasn't dilly-dallying, I was just the last in line. I got off the train and turned over my shoulder to tell the driver to have a great day, and he yelled, "Whoa, whoa, 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 freeze!" It was such a departure from how we'd been chatting that I did, in fact, freeze. Just outside the train car, a pickup truck whooshed past me, no more than an arm length from my body, going at least 40 miles an hour. I felt the wind from it ruffle my hair and clothes. That's how close it was. Guess that guy was tired of waiting for people to disembark and or thought there were no more people getting off the train, even though the warning lights were still on. The driver and I had a good laugh about it, but he absolutely saved my life, or at least saved me from some very expensive medical bills. I'm glad I was sober and wasn't wearing headphones. Thankfully, the stop was right in front of my house because I was pretty young and pretty shaken up once I realized how near of a miss I'd just had. It always blows my mind how many other people some drivers are willing to put at risk just so they can shave 90 seconds off their arrival time. Please stay alert, whether you're on foot or behind the wheel. Story 64. At a national park outside of the States for a camping trip. This park is known for its hot springs and waterfalls. In the morning after our first night camping, an uncle and most of my cousins agreed to go bright and early to the main hot spring at the base of the largest waterfall of the area. We get there and a park person tells us not to panic, as there were some rocks sliding not too long ago. We don't exactly take his warning with too much alarm and continue on to the mouth of the waterfall and hot springs. I still remember two older ladies sitting on some stairs getting deliciously hit on and massaged by the waterfall on their backs. My cousins and uncle want to go deeper into the mouth of the cave, but I don't care for it, as it's a bit too hot and it made me uncomfortable. I shyly complain, and my uncle says we should all leave if not everyone is comfortable. We had spent more time walking to the spot than we did stay at the spot. Not even 10 minutes did we relax at the base of the waterfall. We leave, passing the unmoved older ladies on the way back. As we walked back to the camping site, we heard a booming crash, and a massive dust cloud I had only ever seen in videos of 9/11 floods the campgrounds. The crystal clear river that ran through the campsite, black, brown, like a nightmarish porta potty. We evacuate and later learned that the main waterfall partially collapsed. I never knew what happened to those ladies. When I revisited nearly 2 decades later, the waterfall looks nothing like I remember it. The staircase that the ladies were on is definitely missing. Story 65. About 20 years ago or so, I was driving to pick someone up and went to get on the freeway. As I was about to turn onto the ramp, a homeless guy stepped in front of my car, so I had to wait for him to cross the street. I finally got on the freeway and continued along into the left lane, worried that waiting might have made me late for pickup. About 30 seconds later, I come around a bend in the freeway and instantly think I'm hallucinating because suddenly I'm watching a semi-truck coming down the hill in the median perpendicular to the freeway. It was so bizarre, I felt like I was watching it in slow motion because my brain could barely comprehend what my eyes were seeing. The semi T-boned the car in front of me and the next 3 cars in the adjacent lines. I didn't have a cell phone on me at the time, so all I could do was continue on to help clear traffic for the emergency vehicles who thankfully showed up very soon. In the first car that was hit, the one that was the car in front of me in the left lane, the driver was very clearly dead. As I drove past, I realized that if that homeless guy hadn't jumped in front of my car, that I could have been the car that got hit by the semi instead. It came out later that the semi-truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel before losing control of the truck. The impact was made worse by the large downhill slope in the median between the freeway lanes. They've since put in barriers between the lanes at the section of the freeway. I was going through a rough time in my life at that point, and it made me reevaluate a lot of life choices and goals. Of course, I also still cannot drive next to semi-trucks. Story 66. The last day I ever snowboarded, I borrowed a Jeep with kind of balding tires and drove myself alone out to Vail. It was a pretty good day snowboarding, but alas, I ended up breaking my arm in the park at the end of the day. Oh well, just gonna have to drive a stick shift with balding tires 2.5 hours in near blizzard conditions with a broken right arm. No problem, right? It was a huge problem. I made it almost all the way back to Colorado Springs. I was literally 3 exits from the north gate of USA FA when I spun out, just hit some black ice and started spinning. I entered the center median backwards and exited sideways into oncoming traffic. Now, luckily, they were blizzard conditions and there was hardly anybody on the road, except the semi heading my way in the center lane who had absolutely no way to avoid me except hope. I mean, he makes an aggro turn, he's spinning out and flipping too. I feel like I locked my eyes with him and made my peace with the crappy decisions that led me there. I escaped death by maybe 50 yards, coming to a stop on the far side of oncoming traffic. Story 67. When I was about 18, I went to a dermatologist to get some treatment for minor psoriasis. It was my first time at this particular doctor's office, and after signing in, I saw a notice saying that all new patients get a full body examination. I was not thrilled with the idea and told my dad that I was going to leave and just live with the psoriasis until I found a different doctor. He convinced me to stay and just go through with it. So I did. The examination was not fun, just as I suspected. The doctor was trying his best to make me comfortable, but I don't really want to discuss how you went jet skiing with your family over the weekend while I'm pulling my butt cheeks apart so you can shine a little flashlight up there. Had 2 spots on my back I didn't even know existed. The doctor found them concerning and did a biopsy for each. Turned out they were both cancerous, melanoma, which in hindsight shouldn't be surprising. I was a lifeguard at the time and I never wore sunscreen. It was thankfully early enough that he was able to just schedule a surgery to remove the cancerous material about a week or so later right there in his office. I still remember how thick the chunks of meat he cut out of my back were. I was out of work for 6 weeks because of it because he was able to confirm he got all of the cancer out before it spread. He told me afterward that I would have been dead in 2 years if I hadn't come in for some psoriasis cream and gotten the examination. I was, and am, very thankful. Had to continue going in for full-body checkups every 3 months for a long time after that. His attempts at conversation while asking me to lift up my sack and pull my cheeks apart, etc. were no less uncomfortable, but I eventually got used to it. After some time, I dropped to every 6 months until I switched jobs and he no longer took my insurance. Then I stopped going altogether. I do my best to minimize sun exposure now and wear a lot of sunscreen when it's avoidable. Been about 20 years since then and I'm still alive and healthy thanks to that guy. Too long didn't read. Found out I had melanoma when going to the dermatologist to get treatment for an unrelated minor skin condition. Cancer was successfully removed through surgery. Story 68. Bear. When I worked in a small remote community, for a bit there was a bear that was stalking people and killing dogs. They had tried to go after it the day before as it charged at some kids at the school, but they got inside before it got to them. The day before, it had a go at me and it knocked down the front door of someone's house, walked through the house, then knocked down the back door to get to their enclosed deck where they were smoking fish. So I drive home from the nursing station. We have a little duplex on the edge of town, directly between the community and the garbage dump by trails. I realize I forgot my laptop in the truck, so I go to grab it, then realize that both the truck is locked and I don't have my key card to get back in the residence building. I go around the corner to get to the other side to grab my coworker's swipe card, and the effing bear is about 8 feet away from me and stands up on its back legs and lets out a grunting snarl that I'll never forget. It takes me a second to realize I'm effed. I have nowhere to go. There's no other building for 100 plus meters from me. Door around the corner is locked. Truck is locked. And hey, I'm effed. The abandoned dog I'd been feeding and letting sleep on my porch for the winter runs up and starts barking and growling, and the thing doesn't come forward. Then about a half dozen dogs appear out of nowhere and start booking it over to us. Bear drops down and runs off back into the brush. I'm shaking, sweating, I can't stand. I call the band cops after a bit and we went out and shot it near the dump. Maximus was the goodest boy. A couple weeks later, when I left for the weekend, he jumped up on the plane with me, and the community members didn't seem to think I'd be stealing him. His family had left the community the fall prior and hadn't returned. I wasn't comfortable having him on the plane without a collar or leash or crate, so they had to carry him off. I brought a leash and collar the following Monday and planned to take him out, but he had chased a rabbit onto the river during the thaw and went under. Story 69. When I was a teenager and my stepdad had brought his guns home, he left them upstairs and my brother was showing them off to his friends. Nobody knew there was a bullet in the chamber, and it went off. Thankfully, my brother had some sense and had the guns pointing down. The problem with that, though, is the bullet went through the ceiling, through the kitchen table, and through the chair I had just gotten out of and lodged into the floor. I don't even remember why I got up, but I was literally 3 steps away from the chair. That's not the first time I almost died in that house. The ceiling collapsed onto my bed right after I got out of it. I was in trouble and had to go to my room. I was laying in my bed, bored out of my mind, when I decided to see if my punishment was over. Not even a few steps from it when I heard this big crash and dang ceiling was on my bed. We lived in an old house with plaster walls and ceilings. Dang, dude, save some luck for the rest of us, man. But seriously, glad you're safe. Story 70. A couple years back, I had a 96 Subaru Legacy that had been having alternator and battery issues, so myself and some friends swapped both. Going on a little test drive up into the hills, my car starts to die. Car dies and won't start back up. Buddy and I wait a few minutes to get cell service when a random passerby stops and gives me a jump. Decide to drive back into town. I know a place where I can basically coast to and I only have to hit one single stop sign. Going back into town, car's doing good as long as I'm not stopping. I get to the stop sign, I'm the first car, there are no other cars stopped. Perfect. Car starts to die right as I go through the intersection. Almost no acceleration is happening. Guy in a red SUV blows the intersection at roughly 60 miles per hour. If my car hadn't started to die again when it did, I would have been far enough ahead to have eaten that head. Alternator ended up having a busted ground stud, got a new one, and I think about that a lot. How many times have I just been a second or two away from death? Story 71. When I was 19, I was driving back to college and it had just snowed the night before. I went to merge onto the highway. It was around 8 or 9 in the morning, so the highway had a pretty good number of cars for a Sunday morning. So this spot at the highway is notoriously difficult to merge on because there's no speed up ramp and you really have to gun it to get on sometimes. I saw a very small opening in the right side lane and floored it. I get up some speed, but then I hit a bit of black ice because I was still slightly on the shoulder from the merge. Car swerves hard and I go back through all 3 lanes towards the divider. I manage to correct it, but I go too hard and I swerve back through all 3 lanes of traffic. I then go up the snowbank on the grass and I'm heading straight towards the side of an overpass bridge. Just before I'm about to pancake into this thing because my brakes can't stop on that quick of a snow, I hit a speed limit sign and it stops me like 10 feet away from a solid wall of concrete. The whole experience must have been like 2 seconds, but to this day I remember those 2 seconds like they were hours. I can only imagine was playing on the radio, and I thought, am I really gonna die listening to a campy song about someone dying and meeting Jesus? It's a miracle I didn't hit anyone though. There were so many dang cars on that road and I somehow avoided being hit and then avoided being pancaked into the side of a wall. My car wasn't even damaged. We towed it off the snowbank and it was fine minus some scratches on the bottom from it rising up the speed limit sign. And I can only imagine what safe weather driving conditions would be like. Those can't be the words, huh? Story 72. My high school best friend and I were coming back from a neighboring town and happened to cross two friends in another car who were coming back from a town a similar distance away, traveling in the same direction. They decided to play leapfrog on a 2-lane highway and went to pass us. Almost hit someone cresting a hill. Instead, they veered sharply over and almost hit the front end of my friend's car. 1990 Olds Cutlass. In a panic, he took the ditch, which was about 15 to 20 feet down and had a concrete culvert at the bottom. We hit at an angle and hit so hard the engine came out of the bottom of the car while we essentially bunny hopped, came back and landed just fine with the engine and transmission about 5 feet behind us. When the police showed up, they said if we had been even a few inches at an angle, either pointed more towards the culvert or away from it, their car would have flipped directly into a telephone pole and the 150-plus-year-old oak tree that was next to it. At the speed we were going, 75 miles an hour on a 70, we would have wrapped around them both. Story 73. My turn. When I was about 5 or 6, my neighbor across the street had 3 boys of similar age, and they also had an above-ground pool with a deck and platform to lay out on. While the other kids were at school, my mom and the neighbor wanted to hang out at the pool, and I, being Mr. Independent, took my floaties off when they weren't looking and jumped in, sinking straight to the bottom. I held my breath as long as I could, but I could feel the stinging of the water as it filled my lungs. It was honestly really, truly peaceful, and I just kind of sat there on the pool floor for a few minutes with a, this is it, but it's fine, train of thought. And eventually I'd closed my eyes and I can't remember how long I was down. According to my mom, my neighbor had mentioned how quiet it was, and once they realized they couldn't hear my splashing and swimming, our neighbor had jumped in and pulled me out. She laid me on my stomach and smacked my back until I coughed up some water. Story 74. I was caught in a rock slide during a hike at Maroon Bells last year. As soon as I heard the cracking sound, I knew it was a rock slide and froze. My friend and a random couple finally ran one way and I hesitated, not knowing which direction would be safe since the aspen trees blocked the view of the rocks, and decided to run the opposite way. If I had ran and followed them, I would have 100% been killed by the rocks, but I narrowly missed being hit running the other way. The rock slide was pretty much hitting the way they ran, and if they had ran any slower, they would have been killed too. I still have PTSD from it, and I lost my passion for hiking for a few months after. I'm getting back into it again. It's the whole reason I moved to Colorado, but I still get really scared randomly thinking about it whenever I'm at, whether it's at home or on a trail or trying to sleep. It was the scariest thing I've ever been through, running and praying I wasn't going to be hit and could only hear the rocks hitting and breaking trees above me. Story 75. I hit a tree going 50 miles per hour with no seatbelt and somehow barely had a scratch. I flew forward and to the right so hard my ribs cracked the dashboard in half and broke the glove compartment door in half as well. My head broke the rearview mirror and spiderweb bed the windshield, and my right hand also hit the windshield and made a spiderweb crack. It knocked the breath out of me and my ribs were sore for a few days, and one of the knuckles on my right hand had a 2mm long scratch on it. It was a 72 Monte Carlo, so no airbags, and it just had a lap belt, which I wasn't wearing anyway. I attribute my survival to seeing the tree come into my view as I wildly swung the wheel around to avoid plowing into a cliff, being excited that I was going to make it with maybe just a bit of fender damage. Then seeing the tree dead center in front of me that was impossible to avoid, thinking, I'm dead, and just completely relaxing at the last moment. Also, the 72 Monte Carlo had a fan shroud that was about a foot and a half long, so the crumple zone was massive. It made a V out of the bumper and hood, and the fan and fan shroud were like imprinted onto the engine block. It's like how drunks survive wrecks without a scratch because they're just entirely relaxed and half the time don't even notice they're going to wreck. I'll never forget the feeling of that moment where I just knew I was going to die and completely relaxed and accepted it. It was very peaceful. How does one confront death and reach such a peaceful way of acceptance? One time I was approaching the line of death. I was choking for about 45 plus seconds on some pre-workout that I tried to dry scoop, and it kind of solidified and turned into cement, and I was not having fun whatsoever. I was very scared, and I was like accepting the fact that I was going to die, but there was no peace in it. There was only fear and trauma and hate for myself for being so lazy. I'm not saying I ever want to be in that position again, but if I was, I would like to have some sort of, tranquility. Story 76. I was born in the 90s to a poor family in a fairly high crime rate city. Lots of drugs, lots of poverty. Used to roam around a lot as a kid. Parents were stereotypes and would have lost their children in today's world. Q was stereotypical white van pulling up on a 7-year-old kid, me, and a 5-year-old brother as we were walking home. Older man got out of the van, passenger, and was trying to get us to come help them. Thankfully, growing up around horrible people, even as a kid, I knew exactly what was going on. Grabbed my brother and ran. We were close to a house an older lady lived in with 2 very large, very scary dogs who barked and came at people like they would attack you, but were ultimately not dangerous. We made it to the yard. I threw him over the fence and followed close behind. Guy saw and heard the dogs come out full force and took off. The lady let us stay while she called to the police and my parents. We talked to her a lot since we walked around the area, and she didn't have family, so she was always happy to see us out and about. My parents pick us up and drop us with my grandparents, both ex-military and had lots of firearms, called my cousin who was also military to come watch us, and proceeded to manhunt the town for the day. That night, my cousin finds a note on my grandparents' door. I never got to see it, but they called the police again while he scoured their land. I remember it looking real horror movie-esque, but could just have felt that way because of my age. My dad managed to catch them on my grandparents' property, proceeded to chase them through the town, eventually ending in arrest, and somehow my father not killing the 2 men. They went to prison, sentenced to 14 years, and served 8. I'm pretty sure I saw one of them again a couple of years back. He obviously wouldn't recognize me. I'll forever remember that day with my little brother. I've never, and hopefully never again, experienced that level of fear. We ran 4 blocks while I screamed for help as loud as I could through residential, and not a single person came to help us. I really thought I was going to die that day and that I wouldn't even be able to save my little brother. Had they not waited for us to get to an area we knew so well, we wouldn't have gotten away. My kids are currently 8 and 12, and I still don't let them go anywhere unsupervised. I feel overprotective at times and struggle over it. Story 77. Was solo hiking 3 mountains when on my descent the weather changed and the visibility was terrible. A long story short, I descended a false peak believing it to be the right one, and at the point I realized it was the wrong peak, it was too steep to retrace my steps. I had to navigate down as far as I could, taking my time surrounded by huge drops and really sketchy terrain. I got to a point of no return, couldn't move around at all, just a drop, and stayed put for a while until checking over the edge one last time before slipping and going over. I fell around 40 feet with many cuts and bruises and 3 compression fractures and different vertebrae in my spine. How I didn't break my spine and end up a paraplegic, I'll never know. I remember everything being in slow motion whilst falling, thinking I failed everyone that loves me, and the grief of unspent potential overwhelmed me with sadness until I hit the ground, screaming in agony, almost being brought back to life, being unable to move or sit up, gritting my teeth in pain. And let me tell you, when falling from such a height, it does things to your body. Embarrassing things. In my descent, I spent over 7 hours just trying not to die. My body was spent. What saved me was setting off so early and making it down far enough that a fellow hiker some ways down the valley could hear my calls for help, to which they notified mountain rescue, and they saved my life. I would have died of hypothermia otherwise. In hindsight, prepare for the worst, take emergency supplies as if you intend to use them, and invest in a GPS device. I owe my life to the fellow hiker and mountain rescue. Story 78. I've almost been hit by a car 3 times. The last time was very close and certainly would have killed me. It was early morning and dark, and I started to walk across the street but stopped halfway. Seconds later, an SUV blew past me. It was so close, inches from my face. I don't know what stopped me, just something telling me to. It's wild because at the time I didn't realize how close to death I was that day. I've only begun to process now, years later. I don't know if this would be considered lucky. I mean, I did live, lol. I also nearly choked on a bite of steak my dad proudly called tender. It was not. It was the scariest experience of my life. All I could think of was dying in front of my daughter, dying by meat shoved down my throat. I ran into the living room and my dad noticed and freaked out. He punched me hard on the back and the steak flew out of my mouth. I have no idea where it is now. I wonder if it's still out there waiting for its next hungry, unsuspecting victim. Story 79. I used to drive a four-wheel ATV for work, servicing retention ponds. About 6 months ago, I was going around a pond and noticed a terrain getting a little sketchy. It was narrow and a little tilted, and I didn't want to get too close to the edge. Now, to paint a full picture, I was going anti-clockwise around the pond, which was very low on the water. This created an area of soggy shoreline and a significant drop of about 1.5 feet into the pond itself, which at the shoreline was about 2 feet deep, and got deeper as you went. So, 1.5 foot drop into 2 feet of water, more or less. I stopped the ATV, considered my options, and realized I was very close to the edge, and went back up. And here's where I effed up. I decided to back away from the shoreline and tried to reverse to the right with the thought that I could just back entirely away and then 3-point turn it all the way around. As I backed up, the front wheel hit that soggy shoreline, which collapsed under the weight of the ATV, me, and 40 gallons of herbicide in the tanks. The entire ATV tipped completely the F over and dropped sideways straight into the pond with me strapped into it. Luckily, I was seatbelted in, something which nobody else I worked with did, because if I wasn't, I most likely would have fallen out and the ATV land on top of me and either knock me out or pin me under 2 feet of pond water to drown in. And unbelievably, that day got even worse. Story 80. When I was 17, I used to hang out on the roof of our school with my friends. There are skylights in the roof of the main building enclosed by plastic. I thought these would be reinforced and I would walk across them casually. One time we had an idea for a senior prank to break the skylight and hang a giant dildo from it into the main building. It took a very light stomp to break the center skylight and I lost my balance in doing so. I can't believe I stomped on it instead of throwing something at it. I can't believe I used to walk across them. I can't believe I was stupid enough to put my life on the line for a senior prank. If I would have walked on the center one that I had stomped on, I am sure I would have fallen through. For reference, our high school used to be a prison, so the main building was multiple stories. Story 81. One summer I went to the river to go kayaking with a bunch of friends. When we got there, they said, "Be careful," since there'd been some rain and there's a couple of trees down. Well, we come to one of those trees and it turns into a military operation, people yelling, "Move to the right, to the left." The left people confused, of course, and I ended up flipped over and pinned under the tree and full belly under the water. The rapids were so strong I couldn't move, couldn't come up for air or be pulled under the tree to come to the other side. Thankfully, a couple of friends saw this go down and jumped on the tree to pull me out. They did it just in time. I was just about to give up. Then they got me and pulled me up. The rest of the canoe trip and for months after that, several coworkers kept saying they thought I was dead. Story 82. One day while I was on travel with my family, we stayed at my godfather's house in Florida. He once took us to the beach alongside his wife, his child, my cousin, and my uncle and aunt. We were on a beach. I can remember it clearly as the day was bright and I drank my first Gatorade at 10 years old. Suddenly, the sun was hidden by clouds and thunder started striking. Everyone was running off to go under the bridge that was near. We thought it wasn't going to be long since we had a whole structure put up. My godfather, dad, and uncle decided to try and keep the structure in place despite the heavy wind. At first, I was just annoyed from both being able to. Hearing the adults struggling to keep calm, I understood the gravity of the situation. I started crying into my mother's arms, telling her how sorry I was because I genuinely thought we were going to die when thunder struck super close to us. I'd say a few meters away since we felt insanely the wind and after it the sound. When it cleared, but it wasn't done, we ran off under the bridge. I'll never forget that day. Story 83. This happened a few months ago. Was driving my sister to work at 6 a.m. It's pitch black, pouring rain, and there had been several windstorms over the last week. On the way to her work, I noticed a pretty big tree had fallen into the opposite side of the road. so I kept that in mind for when I was driving back. Thinking back on it now, I probably should have called non-emergency and reported it so they could have someone take care of it, but at the same time, I live in a small town and it could have been hours till it was taken care of. Anyway, coming back home was even worse. My wipers are going top speed and can barely keep up with the rainfall. And despite going the speed limit, some idiot is tailgating me. When I get around the area where I know the tree is, I start to slow down a little, but I'm also not trying to get rear-ended. Then a semi comes around the corner, and between the rain and darkness, their headlights make it impossible to see the road. I can't see crap, I can't stop, can't move into the other lane. I start to panic a little, and then all at once I see the tree right in front of me. I hit my brakes and swerve around it narrowly between the tree and the semi. It was a close call and the only time I felt so close to death. Had I been a little more to the left, I would have hit the tree head on. Little more to the right, and my little Hyundai would have been pulverized by the semi. Even just staying in my lane and slamming the brakes, I would have been hit square from behind and crushed between the car and the tree. The car behind me stopped riding my butt after that. I went to pull up the recording from my dash cam when I got home, and it wasn't recording that morning. Not sure what kept me from dying that day, other than it must not have been my time. Story 84. Was in a bad car accident when I was about 10 years old. I was a wiry kid and didn't weigh much. Had to fight my older brother and cousin for the front seat, wrestling them and getting into the front barefoot, shoes in hand. My mom was driving us to the mall, me sitting in the front and my brother and cousin in the back. We had a newer van at the time which had weight-activated airbags, which I was barely heavy enough to activate. Halfway through the drive to the mall, I leaned forward in the seat to put my shoes on. Right as I did, so we drove through an intersection, we were T-boned by a large truck. When I leaned forward, I took just enough weight off the seat to deactivate the airbags. If the airbags had deployed while I was leaning forward, it would have broken my neck and shot my head into my knees. The police who responded told me how lucky I was the airbags didn't deploy. If I were just a few pounds heavier, I would have been dead. If my brother or cousin took the front, they also might have died. Story 85. I stood still while two massive trees fell next to me, brushing my arm hair on both sides. Was cutting one tree unaware the other was leaning on it so badly. Usually I move immediately when a tree comes down, but again the inner voice said, "Don't move." Waited at a green light for a minute, then a semi speeds through the light. Inner voice moment. Had a bald eagle land on the road in front of my truck, causing me to stop. A minute later, I had just enough time to swerve and miss a van coming at me head on in my lane. Bullets whizzed by from people shooting at me. Had a group of guys try to take me from my house at night. I like to take walks at night. I caught them creeping up in my backyard. I was able to show I had a laser on one of their chests and let them know how unhappy I was to see them. Story 86. 14-year-old me riding an ATV in the mountains of Nevada. Going way too fast, I saw the curve and started to skid. Saw the cliff and hit the one tree dead on that stopped the ATV. Here's where it gets interesting. When I hit the tree, I flew off to the side, somehow not forward off the cliff. I immediately started seeing this event transpire in third person. I watched my helmet fly off my head as I spun slowly through the air. My body made contact with the sharp rocks that ripped through my clothes and my flesh. As my head slammed against a rock, I was transported back into my body. I sprang up, went to the overturned ATV, flipped it back on its wheels, and tried to play it off. I was in shock. I drove the ATV another 20 or 30 minutes to our destination where the adrenaline wore off and I began vomiting. I went to the hospital later that day and had a grade 3 concussion with severe body bruising. Worst part of the story, it was a family vacation. My father made me go whitewater rafting 2 days after my accident to teach me a lesson. Story 87. I work at a theater and we have one of those revolving stages. One time we were working on a play and the director had her people hadn't worked at a big theater like this before. They made many, quite frankly, really stupid demands and had no regard for safety. There are several hatches on the underside of the revolving stage. Normally, if these hatches are open, the stage can't move unless a technician stands under the stage, so they can see if there's anything hanging down or blocking the mechanism and pushes a button. But this director was going to make art, so they were going to use all of the hatches during play. So naturally, they cheated the safety button, so they wouldn't have to wait for a technician to go down and push it. Fast forward to the premiere. 1 hour before showtime, one of the director's people told me something and one of the hatches was a bit loose and made noise when the stage moved. I go down with a wrench to tighten it. I'm standing on top of a 2-meter ladder with most of my body inside the hatch. I tighten up the thing that was loose and begin climbing down. Literally a millisecond my head is out of the hatch, the stage starts moving. Had I been just 2 seconds slower with my wrench, I would have been crushed and split in half. Bonus. Half an hour later, the director wanted to make another change. This is 30 minutes before the premiere is going to start. This means the working lights are off and the stage area is almost completely dark. Because of this last minute change, a black metal bed is temporarily standing out of place on the side stage. I tripped on it, fell, and broke my nose. Dang, it's like life didn't want to let you get off scot-free. But seriously, screw those freaking directors, risking everyone's safety. Story 88. Family trip to Hawaii, I was swimming with a pool tube. I thought I wasn't going that far offshore. At one point, my mom started shouting at me to come back. When I tried to swim back, I realized the speed of the current sweeping away was faster than me swimming back. Only then I saw that I was way offshore than the other people there. I was lucky enough to have someone swim all the way to me and pull me back to the shore. At that time, I did not realize how much of a danger I was in and didn't thank him enough. If I could, I would thank him right now for saving my life. I could have just ended up missing the sea if it weren't for him. Story 89. I was the driver in this situation, getting off the highway and waiting for the light directly off the exit to turn green so I could make a left turn. Light turns green. Nobody's behind me, and something in my head was telling me to wait a couple of extra seconds to make sure nobody is coming out of nowhere. People like to drive a little crazy in my area, a million speed and a red light cameras around because of it. I start pulling forward, and out of nowhere, somebody that had to have been going at least 60 miles per hour goes zooming right through the red light on the left side where I was about to turn. I legitimately have no idea how I didn't see them at all in 2 extra seconds I took to make sure nobody was coming. If I had pulled any more forward to continue turning, I'm honestly not sure how badly it would have turned up for me or my friend sitting in the passenger seat. Easily the closest I've come to dying so far. I still have no idea what drove me to take those extra couple of seconds, and I think about it every once in a while. Story 90. Turned off the main road into a side road past a local college. A boy racer was just leaving the college in an apparently new car, likely just passed his driving test. He revs the engine a couple of times and floors it. The dumb thing is he's turning right, crossing my path onto the far side of the road. The dumber thing is his mate is driving straight towards him on the road he's joining. The dumbest thing is he hasn't looked left, and he hasn't seen his mate coming until it's too late. So he swerves into the new lane and then straight out of it whilst his mate swerves the opposite way onto the grass verge. Then time slows down and speeds up for me at the same time as 2 cars are barreling towards me and swerving to either side. Boy Racer sees me and has just enough brain cells to swerve again, mid-swerve, even harder. I slam on my brakes, doing my driving instructor proud with an emergency stop that I haven't practiced in well over a decade. I get out and stare at the front of my car, fully intact, not a scratch on it. I'm gobsmacked as I saw the whites of Boy Racer's eyes as he passed by me, missing me by millimeters. Boy Racer hops out, full of adrenaline, jumping on the spot like the car is too hot to touch. He's flattened a lamppost, broken through a fence, and taken a chunk out of a tree, and trashed the front wing of his new car, instant write-off. And he nearly killed me, his buddy in the other car, and his passenger, not to mention tens of pedestrians milling around who could have been sat on the fence or by the tree or the lamppost. A few things may have saved me. 1, traffic lights stopped me before I turned in, so I wasn't at full speed when I had to brake. Stopping distance reduced. 2, I recently forked out 4 new tires, so my car was grippy. Probably also helped stopping distance. 3, I was well caffeinated. Probably helped my reaction time. Story 91. I was going to a friend's house to watch football and I was on my motorcycle. As I approached an intersection, the light was green and I was about a block away. The car stopped at the light, all went through, and there was a pickup in the opposite lane waiting to turn left. The cars ahead of me cleared the intersection and the pickup still sat there. So I figured he's waiting for me about a half a block behind them, doing about 50 in a 45. As I'm about to enter the intersection, he starts moving, and I don't think much of it because people let off the brake as you get close so they can get through quick. Then he starts cutting into my lane and I realize he doesn't see me. I slam the brakes and they lock up, so I let off them and try to swerve out of the way. Mind you, I have probably less than 2 seconds during all of this, and I get hit dead on in my left side. I stayed conscious through the impact, and I remember tumbling and landing on my back. I was in shock and couldn't figure out why my chest hurt so bad. Then I realized my diaphragm was going nuts trying to pump air, but there was no air going in or out of my mouth or nose. Then I blacked out from lack of oxygen. I came to less than a minute later. I found out later at the hospital that my left lung collapsed instantly. I got 8 fractures on my 6 ribs and my left side. I had severe lacerations and severe bruising on both lungs and a hole in the back left side of my chest cavity. Plus, half the bones from my left ankle were scattered around the intersection and what remained had to be amputated. Bikers, please wear proper gear, including riding boots. The only reason I lived is that I landed on my back and my internal bleeding effectively sealed the hole in the back of my chest cavity to allow my right lung to start working again. Alright, is this a sign? Minivan it is. Story 92. I was 14, drove an ATV off the side of a mountain and rammed into a tree going roughly 45. The extent of my injuries should have been far more severe. A mid-thigh hit the handlebar so hard that it sliced it completely open, gaping hole the size of a softball, and I somehow barely missed my femoral artery. Broke and dislocated my left elbow, crushed 5 vertebrae in my spine, hit my head so hard that I snapped my helmet in half. Somehow, I'm still alive, not paralyzed, and without brain damage. The doctors told me that I hit the tree perfectly, somehow avoided snapping my neck, severing my spine, or slicing my femoral artery and bleeding out. Story 93. In my early teens, I was effing about at my old primary school with my mate. We got sick of security lights going off constantly, so I went to cut the wire with my brand new Swiss Army knife. Thanks, Dad. Funny thing is, as I was slicing it, I was like, it keeps buzzing. And my mate was like, whatever, just cut it. So I pulled a double-decker chocolate bar wrapper out of the bin and wrapped the knife in it. When I went to cut the wire again, zap, blew a chunk out of the knife blade and tripped the power, but didn't kill me. Didn't even feel it. The knife just flew out of my hand. I picked it up and we effing legged it. Another friend and I tried to climb one of the 240k volt pylons and the big 3-tier UK ones until the buzz and the static in the air scared us back down. That was effing dumb. I've also been run over, dead sailored off a 40-foot step down during a downhill MTB race, been thrown off 2 motorbikes, and fallen from many trees. Now, I'm just married. Story 94. I can actually answer this one. I was going for a bench press PR, and I had spotters who I trusted and had been lifting with for a while after warming up properly. I went in for my first attempt. The rep felt pretty good. I was moving the bar up, albeit slowly, and felt like I had it, but my spotter effed up and helped me too early and let go of the bar before I re-racked, and I dropped the weight on my chest and stomach with no injury to any part of my body. The first rep was a struggle, but I really thought I had it, so I felt confident enough to try it again around 10 minutes later. This time my spotter, different guy as the first guy was scared, helped me unrack the bar, but there was a miscommunication between the two of us and he released the bar before I was ready, causing me to drop the weight again. And somehow, miraculously, I had absolutely no injury to any part of my body at all. In hindsight, I literally could have died had I dropped the bar on my chest or my throat. Bones could have been broken or muscles could have torn if I tried to stop the fall of the bar while it was falling straight down. I have no effing clue how I came out unscathed other than pure dumb luck. Almost everything that could have went wrong did. The only thing that went right was me not being injured somehow. Story 95. Was passing through a town at like 2 a.m. Saw a man lying on the road with a motorcycle next to him in a corner where you turn right. It was really dark and there were bushes, not to mention it was near any houses and no one would be passing since it was so late and a weekday night. I was with my family, husband, baby, mom, brother. I told my husband to just keep going since something just wasn't right, you know. There wasn't any skid marks on the road and the guy was wearing shorts and a shirt but he had no injuries. We all agreed and said something wasn't right and didn't want to take the risk, especially with a baby in the car. Not long after, my mom read a news article that said on that very same road, a man was trying to help a motorcyclist laying on the road, but was jumped by a group of people and stabbed with a long knife 13 times and is now in critical condition in the hospital. This happened last week and we just found out today. Story 96. This one is actually pretty funny. So I went to go see A House of 1,000 Corpses with my best friend Steve and my stepsister, Megan. About the time the movie came out, crop tops were still in fashion and my stepsister is pretty well endowed. So she did have the girls on full display that night. On the way home, I let my stepsister sit up front and I sat in the back seat. Passenger side. As we're driving home, I'm watching my buddy Steve drive his car without looking at the road at all. He was just staring at my stepsister's chest and not even trying to hide it. I don't think he even glanced at the road except for once or twice every block or so. So we come up to a red light, but Steve is completely enamored with my sister and doesn't even notice he's coming up on an intersection, let alone a red light. He starts going through the light when I yelled out, "Red, red, stop!" He had to slam on the brakes and lifted. A pickup truck comes within inches of hitting his car on the passenger side where I'm sitting. And the truck most likely would have hit my door based on the speed and all. And that truck was really flying. Just out of sheer anger and a bit of fear after almost dying, I blurted out, "Okay, dude, Megan, can you please just flash this kid or something so we can make it home alive?" My stepsister and I couldn't stop laughing. The more she laughed, the more it made me laugh, and vice versa. By the time we got back to my house, he just dropped us off and didn't even say goodbye when the plan was for him to spend the night. LOL, don't stare at boobs and drive, kids. Story 97. I've had a few. The most recent and the one that sticks with me was a house fire. Old house, built-in detectors hadn't worked in forever. All on me. But my cat, not panicked in the slightest, not trying to wake me, just doing cat things, jumped on my face at about 3 a.m. one night last November. I woke up confused. It was dark, but there was a light flickering off every surface. As I came to, I realized that my space heater was now a campfire. The curtains had already caught, as had the end table the heater sat on. Above, about 4 foot, everything was already black with smoke. I immediately ripped down the curtains and started grabbing everything that was on fire and threw it all out the front door. Then I grabbed blankets and started to beat out the flames on the floor. Problem there was the blankets were polyester and going up as soon as they had fire. Burning molten plastic was flying off and covering it touched as I was throwing blankets out the front door as fast as I could grab them and hit the flames. The 30 seconds it took me to put that flame out was the longest half hour of my life. And if I had woken up any later than I did, they would have probably been the last seconds of my life. Crap's no joke, y'all. In most cases, fire is quicker than you and more resistant than you know. I've been through some crap. I'm generally stupid to back down or run from scary situations, but that crap shook me to my core. A few seconds later in the other direction, and the outcome would have been very different in a bad way. Replace your batteries, get a fire extinguisher. Story 98. I was at an unlimited work bar event where I made good use of that unlimited bar. I had also recently dropped a lot of weight, so my tolerance was low, but I also had a binge drinking problem, so it was a great combination. I got home around 1 a.m. It was winter in Chicago, so pretty, cold, and icy. I stumble up to my apartment, and I could not get the super old lock to turn. I bother my neighbor, who in my memory was dressed like an ICP clown, and he tried to help me get in, but could not. So I ask if I can go to his back door where we shared an outdoor balcony. So he lets me out, closes the door. I'm sure I was super effing annoying. I try the back door, but I can't get that door unlocked either. I decide to go down the back steps and go around the building and try the front again. I take a few steps down and boom, my foot slides out from under me because there's ice on the steps and I slide down a full flight of stairs. The only reason my head didn't smash off the back step is because I was wearing my work backpack and I was both a functional alcoholic and a giant nerd. So my backpack was like 30 pounds of work crap, computer, notebooks, etc. Big enough that it was a buffer on my back to block the head from being obliterated at the base of the skull. I also lived alone, so in the scenario I did at the back of my head and pass out, it was at this point close to 2 a.m. in my desolate shared backyard that no neighbor would have come out until best case scenario sometime in the morning, maybe depending on where I ultimately landed, but potentially not for days. It was 20 degrees out and I am not a person who texts any specific person daily, so real possibility I wouldn't have been found for days. Story 99. I've narrowly escaped death a few times in my life, from close calls with the counterweight of a crane to a car and motorcycle accidents to just barely making it to a hospital with a pulmonary embolism. My oxygen levels were so low they were surprised I was even awake, let alone walking in. Partly because of all these close calls, I tend to believe the infinite universe theory where every time we die, we create multiple more timelines where we didn't die and our consciousness jumps to the best of those timelines until the very end, where no more options are had. Each time I've come very close to dying, there was a split second, just a fraction of a moment, that's just blank and almost feels like a jolt, like being woken from a deep daydream. Where else could that come from? I've also tripped an F-ton, so it could be that. Story 100. I used to live by a creek that ran through my neighborhood growing up. There's multiple points where there's large concrete bridges that continue roads going over them. When I was 14, I was walking on the big concrete walls that act as barriers and fences over the side of it into the water. I did this a lot. I've always had good balance and thought I was super cool. The creek was really shallow, but there were randomly some deep portions where in front of rocks that were just sand where the water had carved it out over time. One day I was doing it and a big gust of wind threw me off my balance. I fought hard not to topple over, but ultimately I fell. I pretty much accepted in that moment that because of the water my phone would be toast and I'd likely be too injured to move. But, to my luck, I fell in one of those sandy divots, and the worst that happened was I fell on my back. Then my heel smacked a rock kinda hard. I sat up, drenched in stinky, very cold creek water, and looked immediately around me. To my left was a big piece of concrete, broken, with a jagged, broken piece of rebar sticking out that if I had made it just a step or two further before falling, would have impaled me. And on my right, a bunch of broken glass and more big, jagged chunks of concrete. But a bit further than the stuff on my left. I decided not to gamble with my life anymore after that. Story 101. I had just gotten out of the military and was staying at my family's house with a friend who was visiting from my last duty station. He was only around for a few days, and the night before his last day there, we decided to get pretty shwasted. We had plans to meet up with a few of my friends in the city, but ended up getting so hammered we canceled on them. The event we were meeting my friends for was the Boston Marathon. Growing up in Boston, we went pretty much every year, sometimes to walk it, sometimes to watch. The bomb went off that day near where we typically hung out. My friends saw and ran. Luckily, only one of them was hurt, but who knows how it could have been for us. A closer call was at my actual duty station in Japan. We were coming down a mountain after a winter festival on completely bald tires. We lost friction and spun out 3 times before hitting a snowbank held by a tree. On either side of said snowbank was just air, like it was a road that wound all the way around the mountain, and every so often there was a tree but no guardrails. We spun in what seemed like slow motion. Story 102. I was going for a run one day, and I should mention that I was pretty stoned and about a block away from my house. There was a commotion going on near the sidewalk. There was a barbecue happening outside of a housing complex, and a large crowd gathered that seemed a bit excited, but I had my headphones on, so I couldn't really hear what was going on. I ran past a woman who said something to me, but it was muffled, so I acted polite and smiled and nodded. Well, it turns out what she said to me was, "They're shooting each other down there." As I ran down the hill, I ran past a car where a guy leaned out the window and started shooting at another guy he was just arguing with. As I ran towards the car, I felt the air shift just a few inches from my face, and I started hearing some screaming from behind me. The bullets flew inches from my face, missed the guy they were shooting at, and the car sped off. I didn't stick around to see what the outcome was, but I did clock a 6:45 mile that day. Story 103. Not me, family friend. Tornado warning. We go into the bathroom. Midwesterners, but it was night and rainy, so it was actually concerning. Sirens go off briefly before turning back on. Means it's past, but we're still in the back half of the warning area. Mom's best friend calls, crying and incoherent, just saying tree and house and babbling. My dad has me throw on a jacket and hop in the truck as we rush over. A 50-plus oak, several stories tall with a trunk about 8-foot diameter came down on their house where the bedrooms are. My dad had grabbed the chainsaw, expecting it had blocked the drive, and he had to use it to cut the branches 6 inches thick out of the way that were sticking between the walls like a laser grid from a movie so we could extract the family from the interior hallway closet. They had moved from their bedrooms to a closet right before the tree came down and had just closed the closet door when the branch impaled the house and jammed it shut. Their bedrooms had room-wide skylights now, but it had missed actually being somewhere it would hurt them, except one. The youngest daughter's bedding was all still perfectly in place despite all the wind. A branch as thick as my torso was impaled at a 45-degree angle down into her pillow. She had been the last one to listen to her mom get up and seek cover. Fortunately, the tornado had completely lifted another house off its foundation and carried it almost whole several feet a half-mile away on the main road. So our friends stayed quiet and all the looters, which is apparently a thing, never went after their house, and swarmed the house that got reported on the news and their neighbors arrested. Story 104. I'm not sure I escaped death, but it's the kind of thing that kills people. I was fairly new to whitewater kayaking. I was on a guided trip that was attempting to pull over by entering an eddy. An eddy is a portion of a river just after a bend that flows upriver. After water goes around the bend, there is a low pressure area that the water has to fill so it flows upstream. It is an easy place to pull over. Since I was new, I stupidly attempted to pull over on the outside of the bend instead of the inside where the eddy is. On the outside of the bend, the water just pushes against the wall and continues downstream. There were branches above and below and the water all along the bend. I turned sideways and got pushed against a branch. The water started flowing past me and over the kayak, pushing it underwater. The branch broke and I paddled away without much trouble. If I had flipped or gone underwater with the kayak in that spot, it is a fairly easy one to get pressed against the branches and trees and be stuck underwater. It is a common way people die in rivers. Story 105. I had 3 separate incidents. Honestly, probably more than these, but one's at the top of my mind. 1. A branch broke off a tree I was climbing when I was about 10, and I fell at least 40 feet all the way down, woke up face first, face down, and all I had was a little bump on the back of my head. My cousin who was with me couldn't believe I was alive. 2. Was coming down a trail from a climbing route I just did, and I didn't see that the plants on the narrow passage of dirt were actually covering the edge where the trail was collapsed. I caught it and starfished down the side about 50 feet before I stopped right at the lip before launching down the cliff below into what was only tree stumps. 3. About 3 years ago, I was coming home at night and there was a 4-way stop just before the house. And right after I stopped, proceeded halfway into the intersection, a sports car comes flying through, literally on my left, and somehow swerved around my hood, like just barely. The kid pulled over and said he didn't see the stop sign. He was 100% speeding at least 50 miles per hour in a residential with no lights on. If not for his swerve, I would have been creamed. Bonus. Was running with my dogs at night and a couple buddies in 2 cop cars swerve in front of us and pull guns, saying there was someone who matched my description that was carjacking. They were super heated. I thought for sure we were getting shot. I just slowed my breathing and me and my friends didn't make any stupid jerky movements. Story 106. I don't actually remember mine because I was 2 at the time, but my family and I lived in Anchorage, Arkansas, for about a good part of my early childhood from about 1.5 to 5 years old. Living up there, my parents were all about fishing. We'd take trips all over the state no matter the weather just for a perfect salmon season. Anyways, back in '96, we took a trip to the Chugach National Forest at some campsite on the Russian River out in Kenai Peninsula for salmon season. Right as my parents were setting up a small tent for us kids to hang out in so they could fish, according to their friend, I took a running start and jumped directly into a river jacket, boots, and all, and I'm swept away immediately. My mom says it was as if she blinked and she lost complete sight of me. Full hysteria on the campsite, no cell phones, and pure chaos trying to figure out if they'd find or recover me ever. Keep in mind this is '96, so park rangers aren't just a call away like they are now. But we were lucky one was at the site checking fishing licenses at the time, and just happened to be in the right place at the right time. One long off-road ATV trip with my hysterical Army vet dad on back, and they found me about 5 miles down, still in the river with my big yellow puffer jacket hood stuck on a jagged rock, literally holding me in place against the rapids. If it wasn't for that dang jacket and that park ranger checking licenses that season, I probably would have died. My parents also never took me there again, and I'll never hear the end of ruining their perfect salmon season. Story 107. I stole over $80K worth of product from a certain MC and ran for my life for 3 days before fleeing the country. When I was running, I got hit by a car, broke 4 ribs, and my left arm got back up, started running again, and one of the club members had gotten ahead of me during the accident and was waiting for me around the corner from where I was hit, so he stabbed me in the stomach as I came around the corner, and I managed to push him away and continue running. Mind you, I didn't realize I had a knife in my gut because I was high as F. But anyway, I got away at that point. I had lost enough blood, I should have been dead. But again, high as F. So I ended up finding the nearest vet clinic and stole everything I needed to keep myself alive. Needless to say, I was high AF. I passed out after pulling the knife and cauterizing the wound with a butter knife, and woke up in a dumpster by this point. It was morning, so I crawled out of the dumpster with my duffel bag and started running again. Finally made it to my buddy's place where I passed the F out again because I was high AF. My buddy and his EMS friend patched me up properly, and of course, my My buddy was freaking out about the amount of product I had and asked me to leave ASAP. So I waited till dark again and got to the nearest store, bought new clothes and a new bag to put my stuff in, and got on a train to the farthest city the train could take me, and I called my contact, had them meet me at the location, dropped everything off to them, got paid, and left the country. I don't want to speculate here, but he might have been high AF. Story 108. My husband and I were vacationing with my sister and brother-in-law. Me, my sister, and brother-in-law were all snorkeling off the coast of Cozumel, Mexico, when we were both pulled out by the current. I swam out of it into the shore, then turned back to look for my sister and her husband and only saw my brother-in-law was fighting to stay above the water. I tried to get the lifeguard's attention but couldn't, so I went back out for him. When I got to him, his chest was heaving and I thought maybe he was having a heart attack. I told him I was going to get him to shore, but he kept taking me under and I thought, if I don't do something fast, we're both going to drown. So I put my snorkel back in my mouth and I put him on my back, letting him take me under. I swam on my back with him on my back until we could stand up, then helped him out of the water, not knowing where my sister was or if she had made it back or not. My sister ended up way down shore from us and had been able to reach a rope and pulled herself back to shore. She was frantic and couldn't understand why we hadn't come to her, not knowing her husband had literally almost drowned. To this day, they never snorkel without life vests and still say it was the best vacation ever.